the crime scene. So if you are going to look at this one, meron tayong example, okay? Please take note of the example kasi meron tayong tanong later on, okay? After the scenario. So basahin natin yung scenario natin. A young girl was abducted from her bedroom one evening. So meron isang batang babae, inabduct siya, okay? She was then transported by car to a small hut in an isolated place and was sexually assaulted. So, may isang babae, inabduct, tapos inabduct sa kanyang bedroom. Tapos, isinakay siya sa isang sasakyan, pinunta siya sa isang small hut, tapos, okay, that is where she was sexually assaulted. Now, meron pang isang scenario dyan. Following the assault, the abductor shot her to death and carried the body into the woods where he buried it in a shallow grave. So pagkatapos niyang inassault yung babae, hindi pa nakontento, binaril. Okay, pinatay yung babae. Tapos the woman was carried into a wood. Tapos he was uh, the body was buried in a shallow grave. So that is our scenario. That's our case. That's our crime. Now, ang tanong, what look at the question, it's not is. What are the locations in the given example that would constitute a crime scene? Okay, so I would require an answer, please. So, ano kaya yung mga places that in-identify natin ang pwede nating ibilang na magko-constitute na crime scene? Okay, the car, the hut, and the woods. Ano pa? Tatlo yung binigay doon. Girls room. Okay, pang-apat na yun. That's the bedroom, right? So, that is our crime scene. So, pag titignan natin yung sagot dito, the first one is the bedroom. Okay, that's we call it the primary crime scene. Okay, wherein the original crime or the original act has been committed. Tama po ba? Now, after this, ano susunod? Yan, the car. Ang tawag natin sa car, we call it the conveyance crime scene. Ibig sabihin nun, yung ginamit, okay, to transport the body or to transport the woman or to transport the commission of the crime. Okay, kapag wala yung sasakyan, then probably, okay, the crime would not have been consummated. Although nakuha niya, yung babae, na-abduct siya, pero abduction was not the main purpose. It was sexual assault. So, importante yung car as one of your crime scene. Ang tawag natin sa car na to, conveyance crime scene. Ano pa yun? Of course, the small hut, dito siya ni-rape. So, this is where you can find yung tinatawag natin na pieces of evidence that are very valuable to establish the sexual assault and the death of the woman. So, probably you can find here biological evidence. Unang-una, blood po yan. Okay? Pag iniwan yung baril, pwede rin maging part yan na mahanapan natin sa hut. Ano pa yung pwede nating mahanap doon? Of course, pag yung baril ginamit niya is probably 9mm or caliber 45, maiiwan yung shell. Yan. Sa sexual assault naman, sa side ng sexual assault, anong evidence ang pwedeng makuha doon? Probably, nagkaroon ng transfer ng hair. Okay? It's either head hair or pubic hair. Okay? Or pwede rin namang seminal fluid. Okay? So, yun yung mga pwede nating makuha sa ating small hut na crime scene. And finally, pagkatapos na pinatay, nilagay siya sa shallow grave. So, in defining crime scene, napaka-broad po ng definition ng crime scene natin. Ano? Hindi lang po tayo mag-i-stick sa isang lugar. Okay? So, we have to identify the complete story kung anong nangyari sa incident natin para ma-identify natin yung iba pang mga crime scene. So, here is now our definition of a crime scene. It is where you can find physical evidence. Okay, may mas better definition ito mamaya. Okay, so one of the simplest definition of the crime is any location, okay, any physical location where a crime is committed. So yun yung simplest definition natin ng crime scene. Any physical location where a crime is committed. Now, pagdadagdagan natin where the victim and the suspect and the crime scene has interacted. Ibig sabihin nun, nagkaroon ng interaction yung victim at suspect, yung victim sa crime scene, yung suspect sa victim, at yung suspect sa crime scene. Yan yung ating definition ng ating crime scene. So, sabi dito, yung role ng officer. Sino kayong role officer ito? Basically, it's the first responder. Okay? Ito yung pinakano niya, is to prevent the following. Okay? Destruction of evidence that could have led to the arrest of the criminal and to the resolution of the crime. So, ganito ka-importante ang ating crime scene. We have to identify our crime scene. Yan. So, here is the question wherein uh, we can now make a list. Okay, make a list on what will constitute a crime scene. So, the answer here is all areas. Kung saan yung criminal, yung victim or eyewitness move during the time when the crime was committed. So, this is one definition. Pwede pa ito. The boundaries must be established so that the entire crime scene can be effectively preserved. So, ito yung term natin na cordon the crime scene. Tama po ba? However, sabi dito, however, in some crimes, the crime scene may actually comprise several different sites. Okay? Kaya papasok na tayo sa ating list ng ating types of crime scene. You have there a primary crime scene by the word primary. So, yan yung original or first criminal act. So, example natin is the bedroom kung saan na-abduct yung babae. Secondary crime scene, you have their subsequent criminal activities. Okay? By the word secondary, self-explanatory na po ito. Like the site of a murder and the subsequent location where the body was moved. Binaril siya sa primary crime scene tapos itinapon siya sa isang secondary crime scene. Pwede rin po yan. And yung sabi nga natin, we have the term conveyance crime scene. Yan. So any transportation that may have been used in the commission of the crime is our conveyance crime scene. Yan. So meron din tayong principle or sinusunod na rule sa ating crime scene. Sabi dyan, anong sabi dito? Crime scenes are very diverse and unique. And like our fingerprints, no two scenes are exactly the same. Okay? So, wala pong crime scene na exactly na magkaparehas. That is why, since this is the principle, then there is now a distinction that we can now claim that bawat crime scene ay unique. Okay? Kahit na parehas na theft yan, pag nanakaw na crime, still, okay, even if it is near in the same two locations or two rooms, still, they will not be exactly the same. Kasi nandun yung word na exact. Okay, so, walang exact na crime scene. Sabi dito, ito yung term na ginagamit natin. Forensic science begins at the crime scene. So, forensic science is the application of principles of forensics. Like blood spatter analysis, yung dugo. Okay? Ini-examine din yan. Of course, fingerprints. Okay? And other biological examinations. Okay? So, every forensic investigator has to recognize physical evidence. Ito po yung pinakamahirap na stage ng investigation, which is we call as the recognition phase. If maalala niyo yung 5 phases of criminal investigation, yung una is for you to be able to recognize the evidence. Okay? And of course, is the proper preservation. Kaya nga po marami tayong rules in preserving evidence. Isa na po yung never use plastic. Ang recommended is paper. Yan. Sabi dito, kapag nasira yung ating ebidensya, any amount of sophisticated laboratory instrumentation can salvage the situation if physical evidence is not collected properly. In summary, itong term na to, yung isang slide na to, sabi niya, kahit pa gaano ka-high-tech ang ating technology, kahit pa gaano karami yung gadget or ka-advance yung gadget, if sa crime scene pa lang, paltak yung pag-collect natin ng evidence, sirang-sira na po, useless na po yung ating evidence. Kaya meron tayong tinatawag na forensic value. Okay? Forensic value of evidence. Ibig sabihin nun, dapat sa crime scene pa lang, tama ang pag-collect. O, bigay tayo ng example. Paano po natin pulutin ang isang baril na naiwan sa crime scene? Maalala niyo po ba yun? How do we collect a firearm? So for example, it's a 9mm pistol. How do you collect a 9mm pistol in the crime scene? Do you remember the old practice? Ano ba yung old practice natin nun? The old practice is, yan yung tama po, yung pick up in trigger guard. That's the new practice. You know, the old practice before was to insert a pen. Tama po ba? Ipasok daw yung pen doon sa barrel. Yan, that's the old practice already. Now, naalaman nila, syempre, meron siyang tinatawag na riffling, di ba? Naalaman nila na ma-alter o masisira yung ibang marks kapag ipapasok mo yung any object, okay, in the barrel. So right now, anong gagawin? You can use, okay, a thread and pick it up in the trigger guard. So ito yung tinatawag nila na collection, proper collection, okay, of physical evidence. Okay, so sabi dito, the techniques of crimes investigation are not difficult to master. Hindi po mahirap pag-aralan kung paano magkolekta ng evidence sa crime scene. Okay? Certainly, it lies within the comprehension of an average police officer. So any police officer can have the idea or even can master how to properly conduct crime scene investigation. So that's what the statement is all about. And if you remember this properly, you know, hindi po mawawala itong sa Edmond Locard. Noong last recent board examinations, yung tinanong ka sa kanya is yung the father of poroscopy. Yan yung tinanong kay Edmond Locard. Pero sa crimes investigation, ito yung pinakasikat niya. Sometimes they call it as the exchange principle or the principle of transference. Yan. Ito po ang ating binding principle kung bakit kiniklaim natin na there is no perfect crime scene. Diba? Maalala niyo po ba yun? That there is no perfect crime scene because of this principle. Every contact leaves a trace. Okay? Pagpasok ng suspect sa crime scene, it's either meron siyang dala na iiwan sa crime scene or meron siyang kukunin na nanggaling sa crime scene. That's the idea. Sabi dito, whenever two objects come together, they always have physical transfer, like nagbanggaan yung dalawang sasakyan. Okay? Anong common na evidence na pwede nating makuha? I have their paint chips. Okay? Yung isang rubber, gumamit siya ng tool para buksan ng isang, for example, isang safe or isang vault. Then you have tools and tool mark evidence. Yan. So ito yung principle ni Edmond Locard. And these materials na tinatransfer, we call them trace evidence. So these are examples of our trace evidence. Marami po ito. Okay? And bawat evidence may kanya-kanyang process or procedure of collection. So for example, hair. Paano po natin i-collect ang hair? Okay? Ilang sample lang required para i-collect ang hair. May standard po yan. So for example, if you collect a hair, meron tayong tinatawag na pulled hair, yung pinull out. Meron tayong cut hair at meron tayong tinatawag na naturally fallen hair. I-collect po natin lahat yun. Again, pulled hair, pwersahang pinull out, cut hair, ginunting, or naturally fallen, sinuklay mo na laglag. Bakit kailangan nating kunin yun? Kasi if you're going to look at hair evidence, meron tayong tinatawag na parts of a hair. Tama po ba? You have there, the tip. Okay, ano yung tawag natin sa tip? The middle and the roots. Naalala po ba? The roots, the medulla. Okay? Ano na yung tip? Nakalimutan ko yung part na tip. Now, ang tanong, saan doon ang pinaka-importante? Kung saan pwede nating i-establish or hanapin yung DNA na pinanggalingan ng hair na yon. Is it the roots, the medulla, or the cortex? Saan po? Uy, importante yun. Dapat alam natin yung hair evidence. Saan manggagaling? Iisa lang yung sumasagot eh. Tama, it's the roots. Yan, it's the roots where you can find. Kaya pag itry nyo i-pull out yung buhok nyo ngayon, makikita nyo merong puti. Diyan po yung source ng DNA. Okay? Kapag yung hinahanap mo is DNA, kapag cut hair, ibig sabihin ginunting, useless po yan. Ang ini-establish lang po sa cut hair is yung sa gitna ng hair. Remember, there's a difference between human and animal hair. Diba? Sa medulla, sa gitna. Yan. So that is the reason why, okay, lahat ng ito mayroong process kung paano kolektahin. Fingerprints, di ba? Alam na natin to. Even soil, may process po yan. Ilang diameter, yung lawak, kung saan ka magkukolekt ng soil, mga ganyan. What is important is to know, okay, and to learn that there is one person in the name of Edmond Locard who proposed that there is no such thing as a perfect crime scene. Wala pong 100% na wala kang may makukuhang evidence sa isang crime scene. Meron at meron. Okay? It would now depend on the skill of our crime scene investigators. Okay, so moving on. Meron tayong other classification ng crime scene. Okay, nadadagdagan yung list natin. Hindi lang pala primary, secondary, at saka conveyance. Meron din tayong, okay, meron na tayo nito, primary and secondary. And yung basic na type ng crime scene natin, based on size. So meron din tayong tinatawag na macro at saka micro crime scene. So pag sinabi natin macro crime scene, ito yung malawakan syempre. Okay? Malawak yung saklaw ng crime scene natin. Kaya, sa crime scene search, maalala niyo po ba sa crime scene search? Inuunahan na natin, okay? Ano yung pinaka-recommended na type ng technique ng crime scene search kapag malawak yung crime scene natin? Kung saan, hahatiin mo siya, okay? Hahatiin mo siya para madali mo siyang i-search ng maayos. Anong tawag natin doon? Kumusta po? Nakikinig pa ba kayo? Walang sumasagot ah.
Yes, sir.
Yun. Tama, quadrant. Ano pa? Good, good. Quadrant. Ano pa yung ibang term doon? Zone. Wala ba yung zone? Yan. Zone search. Kung saan, hahatiin mo siya sa 4 na quadrants. Yan. Yan yung tinatawag natin na macro crime scene. Tapos, meron din tayong tinatawag na micro crime scene. Kung saan, pag sinabi micro, maliit lang yung crime scene natin. Okay? Pwedeng maliit yan kasi hinati natin na nanggaling sa macroscopic crime scene. Okay. So, meron din tayong tinatawag na based on, ang tawag ito? Based on condition. Bakit kailangan natin i-identify? What is the importance? Yan na naman ang tanong natin eh. Bakit kailangan nating malaman ang mga klase ng crime scene? Siyempre, pag conveyance, alam natin ang hinahanap natin dyan. Sasakyan po yan. Now, ang importansya, say for example, in this one, in this particular type of crime scene, organized versus disorganized. So basically, pag i-define natin, pag organized crime scene, maayos. Okay? Malinis yung pagka-commit ng crime. Disorganized, syempre, magulo. By the word disorganized now. Ano ang importansya nito? Ano ang implication? Kapag pumasok ka sa crime scene at organized yan. Syempre, una, there is deliberate planning. Tama po ba? Pinagplanuhan yung crime. Pangalawa, the killer or the perpetrator may be a professional killer. Yan yung implication, yun yung idea na binibigay sa atin ng type ng crime scene natin. Pag nakita mo yung crime scene, talagang malinis yung pagpatay sa victim, talagang dito pa, headshot talaga. Ibig sabihin nun, professional yung killer natin. Now, ano naman ang implication pag disorganized? Probably, yung crime na nangyari might be a crime of passion. Like, nagkainitan, okay, nagkabugbugan, nagkalabasan ng baril, nagbarilan. Tapos magulo yung lugar. Tama po ba? Another implication is, pag disorganized, sabi nila, baka mababa yung IQ. Okay? Yung nag-commit na perpetrator. So these are some of the reasons why we are trying to classify our crime scenes. So based on location, meron tayong indoor crime scene. Medyo madaling i-control po yan. Outdoor crime scene, challenging po ito. Kasi meron tayong other elements like the rain, di ba? Yung weather natin, weather condition, yung mga osyosero natin, mga bystanders natin, pwedeng makasira. So yan, that's the implication or those are the types of our crime scene. Now, tapos na tayo sa crime scene investigation, na-explore na natin yung crime scene. Siyempre, kailangan nating alamin kung ano yung evidence na pwede nating makuha sa ating crime scene. So, the legal term that we use is pieces of evidence. Yan, hindi po piece of evidences. Although hindi po yan importante sa board exam natin na. Ang importante, alamin natin yung 3 na basic type ng evidence. So, ano yung mga yan? Physical, documentary, testimonial. So, those are 3 main and basic types of physical evidence. This is our definition of evidence. Legal definition ba ito? Okay. Di ba, minemorize na ito. Ang tanong ko sa inyo, do you understand what it really means? Okay? Do you understand the importance of this particular definition of a crime scene? So, ano ba yung definition niya? Tignan natin, i-breakdown natin para ma-appreciate natin ang ibig sabihin ng evidence. It is the means sanctioned by the rules of court of ascertaining in a judicial proceeding the truth respecting a matter of fact. So if you just merely define it as such, without realizing its importance in court, it will be not appreciated. Okay? Pero paano pag ganito? Itagalog natin. Ito lamang ang paraan. Okay? It's the only means. It is the only way. Okay? So, yun na, importante na agad ang ebidensya natin. You cannot just accuse someone without presenting proof, without presenting evidence. That's why, sabi niya dito, it is the only means or it is the only way that is sanctioned or allowed by our court. Ito lamang po ang pamamaraan na tinatanggap ng ating korte para i-establish mo kung ano ang katotohanan. Yes na po ba? It is the only means, it's the only way that our court allows, okay, that the court allows, that you can introduce in order for you to, okay, tell what is the truth. Classic example, okay, classic example. Meron kang kaibigan, okay, isang gabi, magkasama kayo umuwi. Tapos biglang meron tayong tinatawag na riding in suspect. Hindi na po riding in tandem ngayon. Ang term na ginagamit natin is riding in suspect. Tapos biglang bumaba, tapos binaril yung kasama mo. Okay? Tumapon pa yung yung dugo sa mukha mo. Tapos yung bumaril na riding in suspect, tinanggal yung helmet. Okay, namukhaan mo siya. Tapos sumigaw siya. Ito para to sa jowa ko. Okay? Binaril. Nakita mo yung mukha niya. Siyempre, nag-report ka ng crime. Here comes the investigators. You gave your testimony. Ang problema, the police officers who conducted the investigation are not equipped with the necessary skills. Yung ebidensya, hindi maayos yung pag-collect. Nagkaroon ng contamination, hindi nasunod yung chain of custody ng evidence. When you now present the evidence or when you now present the case in court, even if you claim, nakita mismo ng dalawang mata mo na binaril yung kasama mo. Pero, nasaan yung ebidensya? Yan. The evidence is very important to support your testimony because your testimony alone will not stand in our court because our court relies solely on evidence. Yan. So, yan po ang ating explanation kung gaano ka-importante ang ating ebidensya. So, ito na po yung tatlong klase niya. Maraming tech subjects. There are many subjects, okay, that will cover this discussion on evidence, like testimonial evidence. Ito po yung pinaka-common type ng evidence natin. Yan, nandito, obtained through interview, interrogation. Okay, yung witness natin, you have the ordinary and the expert witness using their 5 senses. Yan. Now, meron po tayong unique na crime kung saan the testimony of the witness alone is enough to convict particular accused. Ano pong crime kaya yun? Isipin nyo, kung saan yung testimony lamang po niya ay pwede at sapat para makonvict ang isang suspect. Pero generally, of course, magiging corroborative evidence lang po ang testimony. Tama po ba? Yung testimony ng victim. Pero, sa crime na ito, it's a crime. Okay? It's a crime. Sa crime na ito, sapat na po yung testimony ng ating victim. Sabi niya, yun, very good. Mr. Din yung pangalan, Mr. Jasper. It's in the crime of rape. It's a very unique type of crime wherein papaniwalaan po ang testimonya ng ating biktima. Kaya nga po, napakabigat kapag isang tao ay maakusahan ng crime na rape. Kasi, most of the time, rape cases are committed with limited to no eyewitnesses. So we will rely, of course, on the testimony of the victim, plus supporting evidence like, of course, medico-legal examination result, okay, examination of the vagina of the woman for lacerations, yan. But, okay, sabi natin, this type of evidence, for this type of testimonial evidence, in rape cases, napakabigat po ito na ebidensya. Lalo na pag hindi patay yung ating victim, okay, mabigat po ang ebidensya. Kaya most of the time, pag buhay ang victim, nag-file ng kaso, medyo mahihirapan yung suspect. Okay, most of the time, mako-convict po ang suspect natin. Yan. That's our testimonial evidence. Okay? So, our testimonial evidence in other sources, ito yung other definition niya, is oral or written statement given to the police okay, as testimony. Remember, even witnesses of a crime, when they are going to testify in court, they're going to make an oath. Tama po ba? They're going to make an oath. Kaya nga, mabigat po ang testimony ng ating mga witnesses. Kasi pag hindi sila nagsabi ng totoo, tell the truth and nothing but the whole truth, meron pong karampatang kaso ang pwedeng ipapataw sa kanila. So imagine, nag-testify ka na nga lang, nag-volunteer ka. Pero pag nagsinungaling ka, kakasuhan ka pa. Yan, kaya meron tayong kaso na false testimonies. Yan yung pinaka-common na pwede nating i-charge. Okay, wag na ito. Yan. Okay. Sabi natin, it's in sexual assault cases. Next. The second type of evidence is a documentary evidence. Okay, so madidiscuss po natin ito sa subject nyo na question document examination. Diba? Maalala niyo po bang definition ng document natin? A document. What is a document? Yun muna ang establish natin kasi documentary. A document is only not limited to the paper. Tama po ba? Yung kasulatan. Hindi lang po yan ang definition ng document natin. Kasi ang document, as per definition, is any, remember this, sign, symbol, letter. Tama po ba? That will convey meaning to someone. So any symbol, any sign is a document. Okay? Not only on paper. Writings on a wall, even graffiti, can be a documentary evidence. Tama po ba? Markings, okay, on any item can be a documentary evidence. Pero, teka lang muna. Paano natin i-differentiate ang physical evidence to that of a documentary evidence? Yung keyword po natin dito is it definitely and absolutely conveys meaning to someone or somebody. Ito yung explanation natin sa QD subject natin. Kapag yung pinag-aaralan natin, kapag yung dinidispute natin is yung papel, okay? Ibig sabihin yung papel is may watermarks ba? Ilang taon na ba yan? The make and manner of composition of the paper, kapag yan ang dinidispute natin, that is physical evidence. Tama po ba? That is physical evidence. But if the one that is being disputed are the writings on that paper, that becomes documentary evidence. Yan po ang discussion natin, yan po ang explanation natin sa document. Okay? Between documentary and physical evidence is if, say for example, I'm going to use an example, cell phone. Basically, a cell phone is a physical evidence. Tama po ba? Kasi it's a physical object. However, once the contents of that cell phone is the matter of dispute, like text messages, okay, nagkaroon ng away, tapos may text messaging, that becomes, the cell phone now becomes a documentary evidence. Okay, para mas maintindihan natin, magbigay tayo ng example. So sabi dito, it is a type of evidence that is used in a trial to show certain information. Okay, so ito yung example natin. Writings on a wall. If it conveys meaning to someone, that is documentary evidence already. Okay? Yan. Teka. Yan. These are, graffiti or something that is written on walls. But once it is being disputed, that becomes documentary evidence. Even dun sa lapida. Of course, yung lapida, that's physical evidence. Pero yung writing, pag merong dispute sa writing like born and died, merong issue dun, that becomes documentary evidence. Yan. Tignan nyo to. It's a pant. Pantalon. Pero yung tatak nito, Elvis. Ito, lives. Kita nyo po ba yung difference? Kapag yung dinidispute natin is yung pantalon parang may blood stain, ganyan. Kinolekta mo na yun. That's physical evidence. But if the markings on the pants is the one being disputed, look at this. That becomes documentary evidence. Another example. This is our perfect example. Yung ulo ng charger, ginamit sa crime. Kinolekta mo kasi may dugo doon sa charger. That is physical evidence. But if the one being disputed are the writings or the markings on that particular charger, that basically is a documentary evidence. Yan. I hope you have understood our discussion. Okay? Our distinction on when can we claim that such writing is a documentary evidence or a physical evidence. Yan. So, tapos na po tayo doon sa second type natin. This is our third type of evidence. Marami pong term na ginagamit sa physical evidence. We can call it object evidence, real evidence, or autoptic evidence. Evidence that can be perceived by our five senses. And that's basically our physical evidence. Again, real evidence, object evidence, or autoptic evidence. Yan po ang ating definition ng physical evidence. Yan. Any kind of object associated with investigation, and it should be tangible. Tangible meaning nakikita mo. Okay? And you can use your five senses to describe the particular evidence. So, ito yung other terms na ginagamit natin. Okay? That is synonymous with the word physical evidence. So, there you go. Those are the typical evidence that we can collect in a particular crime scene. Imagine, nagbigay siya ng list ng physical evidence. Physical evidence can be, di ba, pwede nating i-break down further into three types ang physical evidence. Maalala niyo po ba? The three types of physical evidence. You have there, you remember, associative evidence, tracing evidence, yung mga ganyan. Yan. Makaka-cover din natin yan later on. Yan. So, example, this is a example of physical evidence. Yan. Like this one, blood stain on the wall. Okay. So, tapos na nating classify yung evidence. Ang susunod naman is, ano yung principle na sinusunod natin kapag tayo ay naka-encounter ng evidence. So, ito, importante po ito na malaman natin para pag sa board exam may tanong ng mga principles or procedures, alam natin yung kung paano natin sagutan yung tanong. Kasi based on the evidence principles, magkakaroon tayo ng idea. Kasi general na principle ito. Magkakaroon tayo ng idea kung paano natin i-collect yung ating evidence. Ito yung term natin. Ano yung term natin kanina? Forensic value. Yan, forensic value. Bakit? Ano ibig sabihin ng forensic value? Yung evidence na kinolekta, which should reach the laboratory as much as possible in the same condition as when it is found. Okay? So, no alteration whatsoever. So, ito yung the best. If you can preserve the status or the condition of the evidence when it was collected at the crime scene until it's submitted in the laboratory for examination, then you were able to follow the principle of evidence. Ito yung pinakaunang principle niya. Preservation of evidence. Siyempre, with the aid of photography. Okay, with the aid of a photograph. Second, and the quantity of a specimen should also be adequate. Ibig sabihin, dapat sapat yung kukolektahin mo na ebidensya for a particular sample. Like for example, sa blood. If the blood is used for DNA identification, a pint, ano yung ibig sabihin ng pint? Isang drop lang. Okay, a droplet is already enough for DNA analysis. Alam niyo po ba yan? Ganun po kagaling yung DNA examination natin. If the purpose is only for DNA examination, but if the purpose is to identify, meron tayong preliminary test, confirmatory test, mga ganyan, then we would require or need a adequate sample of evidence. Basta ang standard natin, so for example, buccal swab. Alam niyo po ba yung buccal swabbing? Collection of saliva, right? Ano po yung standard na ginagamit? Dati noon, meron tayong dalawang, yung parang panglinis, yung gauze, anong tawag natin doon? Yung dalawa siya, okay? Na cotton buds. Tapos, magsaswab ka dito sa left, magsaswab ka dito sa right. Yan, that's the standard. Sa hair naman, alam niyo po ba sa head hair, ang required na i-collect natin is, hindi lang po 3. Okay, we're going to collect 50 to 100 head hairs. Imagine, anong gamit ng 50 to 100? Pero yung standard. Okay, yun yung tinatawag nila na adequate sample. Kaya nga, okay, meron tayong term na standard or exemplar or known sample. dito po papasok ito. Okay? The evidence collected should be adequate. Ayun, sa number 3 pala yun. There shall be a known or standard specimen for comparison purposes. For example, merong broken glass sa crime scene. So, anong gagawin natin? Kuha ka, okay, yung glass na nalaglag sa floor at kuha ka yung glass na nandun sa window. Kasi, okay, kapag meron kang nahanap na glass sa damit ng victim or suspect, yun po ang tawag natin is the questioned sample or the questioned evidence. Yung na-collect mo sa crime scene, lalo na dun sa window, that is your known or standard sample. Now, kailan po papasok yung term na exemplar? Explain na po natin. Yung standard kasi, this is the traditional terminology that we use. Tama po ba? That's the traditional term, yung old. Pero yung exemplar, that's now the new term that we use particularly when we are going to use it in court as evidence. So, pag maalala nyo, if we are going to introduce the evidence in court, we are going to write it in exhibits. Like for the prosecution, we use letters. Exhibit A, Exhibit B, Exhibit C. Tama po ba? Now, pag sa defense, we use numbers. Exhibit 1, Exhibit 2, Exhibit 3. Now, standard is the old term that we use. Now, when we introduce the evidence in court, the term that we now use is exemplar. Okay, so parehas lang po yun. It's only that in court, the terminology used for evidence is exemplar. Now, once that exemplar or evidence is introduced, it becomes meron na siyang exhibits. Yan. Yan yung gamit nito for comparison purposes. So, here is an example of a sample, yung known. Again, yung term natin is known, standard, or exemplar. Ito is the questioned sample. Ito yung na-collect mo. Okay? Yan. Sa bullet recovery evidence, meron din tayong ganitong technology. Wherein we are going to match, okay, the markings that is made, okay, by this one. So meron tayong extractor marks, meron tayong ejector marks, and so on. Pagdating sa ating bullet or shell. Even in hair, okay, you have a comparison, always obtain a standard, known, or comparison sample. Next principle. Ano yung principle number 4 natin? Keep each specimen separate from others. Yan. So, ito standard po ito. Bawat evidence po, may kanya-kanyang container. Appropriate container. Like, pillbox. Yun yung common na ginagamit. Yung maliit. Okay? Pang biological. Or yung paper, pwedeng yung evidence paper. Parang envelope siya. Okay? Pag wala yung envelope, pag naubusan, meron tayong tinatawag na druggist fold. Yan. It's a technique ko rin, if-fold mo yung papel into 9 sides or 9 squares in order to contain the evidence. And we call it the druggist fold. Yan. So, each type of evidence, ito yung principle number 4 natin, has its own appropriate container. Yan, there you go. So, pag makita nyo, ang dami pong ang dami pong containers ang bawat evidence. Yan. So, ito po sa ating crime lab, nag-upgrade na rin po tayo. Meron po tayong ganitong style na box. Naka-contain dito. Okay. Bawat specialist kasi merong kanya-kanyang gamit ang mga yan. Okay. So, this is the standard setup or look of an evidence container. Makita nyo talagang papel po siya. Parang paglalagyan ng pandesal. Okay? Papel talaga. Pero, syempre, makikita nyo dito, meron siyang appropriate details or markings. Napaka-importante po yung laman yan. Yan. Ito yung improvised. Syempre, sa Pilipinas, hindi unlimited ang supply natin. Limited lang. Kaya, pag nag-improvise ka, ganyan. Pero yung contents niya, meron at meron pa rin yan. Don't worry, we're going to explore this later on. And number 5, principle. Okay, mark and label. Yan, importante ito. The marking and the labeling of evidence is also a standard requirement. Kaya nga ito, pag-aaralan natin ito later on. Ano yung mga laman, okay, ng evidence container natin. Yan. So this is an example of encircling There is a semen there, i-encircle. Okay. So, i-explore natin yan later. Now, meron din tayong tinatawag na labeling through tagging. Kung saan, hindi natin malagyan ng markings yung evidence like this knife. So, anong gagawin natin? Lalagyan natin ng tag. Pero, pag makikita nyo yung contents niya, yung details, the same doon sa kung saan mo siya nilagay sa isang evidence container. Yung standard na evidence container. Number 6, principle of evidence. Makikita nyo, hindi po mawawala ito. The chain of custody shall be maintained. The chain of custody pertains, again, to the number of people who was able to handle the evidence from the moment it was collected at the crime scene up to the moment it was presented or turned over in court. Yan. So, sa isang evidence container na standard, meron pong nakalagay dyan na chain of custody. Tapos makikita nyo dito, meron pong pirmahan. So, sino yung pipirma? Sa chain of custody, napaka-strict po nito. Okay? Binibilang niya kasi, limited ito. As much as possible, kukunti lang makakahawak ng ebidensya para hindi magkaroon ng salisihan. If maalala nyo sa drug evidence, ito yung palaging problema ng ating TDEA operatives noon. Kaya nadidismiss yung kaso ng drug cases noon kasi hindi nila na-establish ng maayos yung chain of custody. Once na merong gap sa time, kasi bati yung time na minomonitor yan. Ilang oras na nandun sa custody ng investigator. Ilang oras na nasa custody ng crime laboratory. Ito kasi, ilan ang allowed? So una is the criminal investigator. Siyempre kasi siya yung may hawak sa kaso. Second is the crime laboratory custodian. Siya yung mag-e-examine sa evidence. Third is the clerk of court. Yung clerk of court, siya yung officer ng court na parang right hand man ni judge. So ibig sabihin nun, tatlo lang ang allowed na pwedeng humawak. Outside of that, it will violate the chain of custody of evidence. Yan. So whatever evidence you have collected that violated chain of custody is excluded. Ang term na ginagamit sa court, that is what we call as inadmissible evidence. Hindi tinatanggap na ebidensya kasi nasira yung kanyang tinatawag na legal integrity. Okay. So those are the principles. Audio check po.
Clear naman po, sir.
Okay, sige. Tuloy natin. Okay. So, tapos na tayo sa evidence. Okay. Na-introduce na rin natin yung crime scene natin tsaka yung ebidensya. Ang susunod, sino na po yung personalities na magtatrabaho sa ating crime scene. So kanina, dinefine natin yung crime scene investigation. If you were able to look at the definition, pag notice nyo, maalala niyo yung sinabi ko kanina, active crime scene. Nandun yung interview at arrest ng suspect. Pero ito, SOCO, wala po silang trabaho dyan. Okay? Yung SOCO, very particular po yan. So, remember, sabi natin nung last discussion natin sa fundamentals, SOCO stands for Scene of Crime Operation or Scene of the Crime Operation. It's not operatives. So, what it is actually an activity, a procedure, and even a forensic procedure. Kaya pag makikita nyo sa definition natin, ito, sa ating bansa, yung CSI, hindi yan ang ginagamit natin. Ang ginagamit natin is SOCO. Okay? As our procedure in conducting crime scene investigation. Okay? That's our alternative term that we are using. And who conducts SOCO is a member of the SOCO team. Yan. These are trained PNP personnel and we call them the SOCO team. Alam nyo po ba? Pag sa board exam, tatlo lang po. Okay? Tatlo lang po ang binibilang nila na miyembro ng SOCO team. Pag meron daw yung tatlong ito, kompleto na yung SOCO team. Pero pag magbibilang kayo, nako, pag tatlo parang kulang, di ba? Pero ganito kasi ang ginawa nila. These are the three most important members of the SOCO team. So ako ang mag-identify sa isa. Of course, basically, the most important member is the SOCO team leader. Ang dama pong trabaho ng SOCO team leader, tama po ba? Okay. Identify the two. Tignan natin kung nabasa nyo na ito, na-encounter nyo na. Sino po yung dalawa pa? Aside from the SOCO team leader. Okay, yung photographer, hindi po yan ang term niya. Evidence collector, medyo malapit na po. Evidence collector is otherwise known as evidence recovery personnel. Siya yung taga-collector ng ebidensya. O sino naman yung maglilista at tawag doon mag fingerprint specialist, hindi po siya kasali. Yun. Tama po. Yung second member natin, very important member, is the evidence custodian. So, team leader first, second is evidence custodian. Remember, he preserves the evidence. He establishes the chain of custody of evidence. Okay? O ano yung pangatlo? Yung pangatlo, ito na siya. Pwede siyang si photographer, fingerprint examiner, question document specialist. Ang dami. Anong tawag sa kanya? Nabanggit ko na yung term. Ito, pakitignan. Okay. Yan po ang third na member ng SOCO team. So pag mayroong crime scene, tapos typical na crime scene lang, yung specialist na pwede mong dalhin, kahit isa lang niya. Okay? Pero syempre, yung specialist kasi may kakategorize mo na yan. Depende sa nature at need ng crime scene mo. So pag may baril, mangailangan ka ng firearms examiner. Okay? Sa shell at saka sa bullet. So depende sa need ng crime scene. Ang importante, sa board exam natin, yung tatlo is the team leader, the evidence custodian, and the specialist or specialists. Pwedeng maging plural yan. Yan. That is our composition of our SOCO team. And here is another definition of our SOCO. Yan. Ito yung old na presence ng ating SOCO. Makikita nyo kahit saan po kayo dito okay, mag-specialize. So, meron tayong firearms, fingerprint. Halos ito sa criminalistic subject po natin ito. Okay? QD, polygraph, photography, biological science. Dito po papasok yung ating mga galing sa medicine na courses, pati yung physical. So, yung sabi ko, may dinagdag po tayo ngayon, yung tinatawag natin na DNA evidence. Meron na po tayong branch ng SOCO na DNA. And yung pinaka-recent ngayon is yung cybercrime. Okay? So, 10 na po ang pwede nating puntahan sa ating SOCO team. Ang kagandahan ng member ng SOCO team, meron pa silang hazard pay. Kaya nakakalamang po sila sa ordinary na pulis. Yan, that is our PNP Crime Laboratory. They are the ones comprising of our SOCO team. And they are the ones who conducting a forensic procedure that we call as SOCO or Scene of the Crime Operation. Yan. So, klaro na po ba? Yan po ang discussion natin pagdating sa ating SOCO. Yan. Now, meron po tayong tinatawag na evolution. Ewan ko kung nakalagay po sa notes natin. Meron po tayong evolution ng ating CSI. Remember, CSI is other countries, lalo sa Amerika, sa Canada, sa Australia. Ito yung mga 3 main countries identified na advance ang kanilang technology sa crime scene investigation. Again, USA, Canada, Australia. Okay? Ang term na ginagamit nila, CSI. Sabi ko nga sa atin, SOCO. So, meron tayong 5 na models ng crime scene investigation. Kung saan dito natin makikita yung evolution kung paano nag-evolve or nag-improve ang ating SOCO team or ang ating CSI team. Yan. Siyempre, we start with model 1. We call it the traditional model kung saan ang ating investigators ay mga patrol officers. So, noon, pag pulis ka, trabaho mo na lahat. Okay? Pag nagkaroon ng dispute, pulis ang tatawagin. Pag nagkaroon ng banggaan, pulis ang tatawagin. Pag may domestic dispute, okay, violence against women and their children, pulis ang tatawagin. Pag may aksidente sa kalsada, pulis ang tatawagin. Pag may namatay na pulis ang tatawagin. Tapos pag pumunta yung pulis, trabaho na niya lahat. Ano gagawin? Mag-interview. Okay? Tapos mangungulikta pa ng ebidensya. Yan ang ating traditional model. Ang advantage nito, siyempre, common po ang ganitong traditional setup sa mga rural areas kung saan kukunti ang crimes. Okay? Kukunti ang nangyayaring crime. Pero ang disadvantage, syempre, minimal experience. Ibig sabihin nun, hindi naman yun ang expertise nila. Ang expertise nila is to patrol, di ba? Pero dahil nga limited yung number nila, kapilitan. Okay? Napipilitan sila na sila ang magkakandak ng investigation. Pero ang disadvantage nga, limited ang training nila. Kasi ang main na duty nila, yung regular duty nila is to patrol. Kaya nagko-conflict yung regular duty nila doon sa kanilang crime scene investigation role. So we call them the traditional model. That's our first model. So in the old days, police officers are expected to be jack of all trades and master of none. Imagine ang ganyang klase ng ano. Ngayon, meron na tayong traffic division, investigation division, intelligence division, women and children protection desk, cybercrime division, di ba? Meron pa tayo yung anti-illegal drugs task force. Yan. Ibig sabihin may specialization na tayo. Okay? So pagdating sa crime scene processing, ito yung model 1 natin. Yan. Makati Police. Tignan nyo yung uniform nila noon. Matikas pa ang mga pulis natin noon. Yan. So, pag merong mangyaring krimen, ang re-responde sila. Hindi lang silang re-responde, hindi lang sila first responder. Sila pa ang investigador. At hindi lang sila ang investigador, sila pa ang mag-crime scene processing. So, imagine, ang dami ng trabaho. Kaya pag mag-testify sila sa korte, sa kanila na lahat. Yan, dyan sila nadadali kasi multifunctional yung kanilang roles. Okay, second model. So, nakita nila na mayroong gap, mayroong need, okay, na kailangang punaan kasi nagko-conflict yung trabaho ng ating mga kapulisan. So, anong ginawa nila? They now introduced, okay, civilian crime scene technicians. Okay, so yan yung model 2 natin. Crime scene technicians. Ibig sabihin nun, ang kanilang focus lamang ay mag-process ng crime scene. Pero, they are civilian. So, meron silang training. Paano mag-collect ng blood? Paano mag-analyze ng blood spatter? Paano mag-collect ng semen? Paano mag-collect ng saliva? Paano mag-swab? Paano mag-cut ng fingernail scrapings? Paano mag-cast? Di ba? Paano gumamit ng plaster of Paris para magkaroon ng moulage or casting, yung mga ganyan. Ang tawag sa kanila, crime scene technicians. So, pag meron nagkaroon ng crime, magre-respond itong si traditional police, tatawagan niya yung tulong ng ating civilian, okay, crime scene technicians. Yan. Ang advantage nito, syempre, advantage nito is yan ang kanilang trabaho eh. Okay? Specialize sila dyan. Okay? Specialize sila dyan kasi yan ang kanilang training. Nga lang, civilian sila. Kaya ang disadvantage niya, they have minimal investigative experience and they have minimal or no global view of investigation. Paano pa natin i-explain itong disadvantage? Sabi nga natin, ang alam lang nila mag-process ng crime scene. Pero wala po silang ability, okay, to analyze the crime scene. Wala silang ability to link, okay, to create theories. Sabi nila, bakit kaya may nakuhang ebidensya sa lugar na to? Bakit kaya ganitong klaseng ebidensya ang nakuha dito? Wala po silang tanong na ganun because they are merely crime scene technicians. They do not have any knowledge or global view on how we conduct investigation. I believe nakuha po natin yung explanation natin. Kasi nga, civilian lang sila. Kasi nga, ang focus lang nila is to be technicians, taga-kolekta lang ng evidence. So pag may nakita silang blood, maalala nyo yung spatter ng blood, di ba? May flow yan, yung malaki hanggang maliit. Yung direction of flow, mga ganyan. Wala po silang pakialam dun. Ang importante sa kanila, ma-process nila yung crime scene. So pag ganun ang mangyari, ang disadvantage nun, they do not have the ability to analyze the evidence present at the crime scene and give a theory kung anong mangyari sa crime scene. Kasi ang role lang nila, mag-collect ng evidence. Yan. So ito ang ating crime scene technicians. Typically, okay, mga ano pa ito, mga nasa medicine, nasa field ng medicine. Kasi marunong sila sa mga evidence like botany, okay, sa mga plants po yan. Entomology, sa mga insects po yan. Like, naagnas yung body, nagkaroon ng maggots, i-analyze nila yan. Okay? Sa soil, you have geology. Okay? Mga technicians ang mga ito. We will require their expertise in cases of this particular evidence will come out in our crime scene. Yan. We call them crime scene specialists. Now, nakita na naman nila yung gap. Okay? Nalulugi yung ating mga police organization kasi walang idea itong mga investigators natin. Kaya, na-create ang model na Model 3. So, ito yung Model 2 natin, Crime Scene Technicians. Ito na yung Model 3. Yung Model 3 natin, ito na po yung current na existing natin ngayon na SOCO team. Kasi, hindi na sila civilian. Sila na ay full-time police officers. And they now specialize in processing and analyzing evidence at the crime scene. Malaking tulong po ang mga ito sa ating criminal investigator. Kasi aside from mangongolekta ng evidence, meron din silang idea. Kasi they themselves belong to the PNP service. Okay? Yung SOCO team natin, yung crime lab natin is under the PNP. Therefore, they have idea, they have knowledge, they have the ability, okay, to understand and analyze the pieces of evidence located at our crime scene. Kaya sabi dito, it's their job. Siyempre, ang advantage, primary assignment. Yan ang trabaho nila. Okay? Kaya we use the word specialization. Meron silang specialization sa subject na yan. They have more experience. They have more trainings abroad. Typically, pinapadala sila sa Australia. Pag hindi sa Australia, sa Canada or sa US. Kasi nandun yung mga high technology na crime scene processing skills natin or techniques natin. And they have more opportunities for training. The disadvantage, however, is syempre, madideplete yung ating resources kasi imagine, sa isang police station, pag 20 lang ang personnel mo, pag meron kang SOCO, ubus na kaagad kasi yung SOCO, 7 hanggang 8 yan. Sino na yung pagpapatrol, sino lang mag-i-investigate, sino lang mag-i-intel. So, yan ang disadvantage ng SOCO team. Okay? Kasi, specialize sila. Hindi mo pwedeng sabihin na, ubusan tayo ng tauhan. Tawagin niyo yung member ng SOCO mag-conduct ng traffic. Hindi pwede. Because of their nature na sila ay specialized na magtatrabaho lamang ang mga ito pag mayroong nangyaring crime. Yan. Kaya nga po meron tayong order ngayon kasi dati ang SOCO team natin regional lang yan. Regional lang po dati. Pero ngayon, provincial na po. Pag napansin nyo, every province, even city, di ba, has their own SOCO team. Napansin nyo po ba yun? Kung saan, hindi na regional. Mahirap po pag regional. Ngayong mayroon ng kanya-kanyang SOCO team ang per province, meron silang binigay na order na whenever a crime is committed and a body of a victim is involved, merong katawan, then they have to always wait for the arrival of the SOCO team. The criminal investigator is not allowed, is not authorized, yes, tama po, to conduct crime scene investigation. Our criminal investigators are only limited to handling the case, but they are not trained to conduct crime scene processing. Kaya wala kang choice. Pag mayroong nangyaring krimen, murder for example, hindi ka pwedeng mag-process ng crime scene as the investigator. Hintayin mong dumating ang SOCO team. Kasi nga, bawat province, meron ng kanya-kanyang SOCO team na nanggaling sa ating Provincial Crime Laboratory. Yan na po ang update natin ngayon. So, ang disadvantage, sabi nga natin, specialized sila eh. Hindi natin sila pwedeng hilahin, okay, pag mga special occasions. Okay? So, that is our Model 3. Ayan, ito na po yung SOCO team natin. Ayan, magandang maging member po ng SOCO team kasi as criminologist po, talagang magagamit ang inyong pinag-aralan. If you want to feel, okay, the field of criminology where you are more into technology, yan, dito po tayo sa crime lab. Kasi may enhance talaga ang skill mo. Ang kagandahan po ng crime lab natin ngayon, hindi po katulad noon na kapag meron kang background sa medicine, saka ka lang makakapasok sa crime lab. Ngayon po, PO1 ka, you are coming from different baccalaureate degree like agriculture, education, IT, or CRIM, papasok ka sa crime lab, saka ka doon pipili, doon sa 10 na binanggit natin, kung saan mo field pumunta, saang section. So kung gusto mo sa QD, kahit wala kang background sa QD, doon ka nila iti-train. Kasi meron pong separate training ang members ng ating SOCO team. So hindi kailangan punta ka doon sa cybercrime, hindi kailangan sa IT graduate ka. Kasi basta willing ka na doon ang gusto mong specialize, pupunta ka talaga doon. Yan. Yan po ang kagandahan ng maging membro ng ating SOCO team. Yan, ito po yung incident doon sa sa hostage taking natin sa Quirino Grandstand. Pero medyo na-criticize po ang member ng ating SOCO team. Na encounter niyo po ba ito? Nag-circulate, nakangiti na nagpa-picture. Wala, dali ito. Okay? Tanggal po ito sa serbisyo. Yan. Nakangiti pa, nakakaya yung incident na to. Nagpa-picture. Kasi, mahilig magpa-picture. Okay. So, that is our Model 3. Our Model 4, ito, yung Model 4, is our laboratory crime scientists. Pag sinabi natin yung crime scientists, nako, ito na po yung counterpart ng unit sa FBI, mga ganyan. Kasi talagang ito, superior technical and scientific skills. Sila po ang pinaka may upgraded, okay? Sila po ang pinaka updated pagdating sa laboratory skills to process a crime scene. Like sa DNA, okay? Ito yung mga laboratory crime scientists natin. So, sabi dito, up to date yung methods nila. Pero, in the same manner as yung natin, yung model 2 natin na crime scene technicians, ito yung disadvantage nila. Wala silang experience whatsoever in conducting investigation. Siyempre, ang dumarating lang na ebidensya sa kanila is yung nanggaling sa crime scene na pinunta lang sa crime lab. Ipaprocess lang nila, i-analyze nila. Wala silang idea kung saan to natagpuan, paano to natagpuan, yung mga ganyan. Wala silang idea dyan. So, yan ang kanilang disadvantage. And another disadvantage, masyado pong mahal ang mga yan. That's why it will deplete the resources of the laboratory. Yan. So, talagang sa laboratory po ang type na ito ng CSI natin. Okay? So, pag merong kinolekta yung investigators natin, yung SOCO members natin, isasubmit po nila sa ating laboratory crime scientists. Yan. Okay. And, okay, ito na yung last model natin ng ating SOCO team or CSI team. We call it the collaborative team. In the Philippines, ito po ang tinatarget nating ma-achieve. Currently, ito ang goal natin. Okay, ito yung ini-aim natin na ma-accomplish as of now. Kung saan by the word collaborative, ibig sabihin nun, nagsama po lahat ng Model 1 hanggang Model 4. Kaya nga, sa crime scene processing, meron tayong first responder. Typically, ito yung mga patrol officer. Tama po ba? Unang dumating. You have their investigator on case. Sila po ang may hawak or handle sa kaso. Meron tayong tinatawag na SOCO team. Sila yung magpaprocess ng ebidensya sa crime scene. Meron tayong prosecuting attorneys or prosecutors. So, ibig sabihin nun, magkakasama silang lahat in order for them to, yung focus ng special crime natin, to gather physical evidence. And of course, physical evidence that has forensic value and legal integrity. So, huwag niyo pong kakalimutan yung word na palagi kong inuulit yung dalawang yun. Ito po yung pinaka-importante sa special crime. Forensic value, legal integrity. Magkasama po yan. Yung forensic value, yung example natin is, dapat marunong kang mangolekta. Kasi, kapag mali yung pag-collect mo na evidence, yung proper na pag-collect sa evidence sa crime scene, kapag sira yan, pag dinating, pinunta mo sa crime lab, kahit gaano ka-advance yung technology na nasa crime lab, kung sira na yung evidence, contaminated na yung evidence, useless yan. Hindi kayang i-examine yan ng advanced na gadget. Anong term natin doon? Forensic value. Now, therefore, pag walang value, walang forensic value yung evidence na yan, pag pinunta mo sa court, wala siyang legal integrity. Ibig sabihin nun, it is inadmissible evidence. Kasi sa una pa lang, sira yung kanyang forensic value. Therefore, kaya nga meron tayong tinatawag na golden rule in investigation. Kasi yun ang pinoprotect natin. The forensic value and the legal integrity of evidence. So, ito na ang ating Model 5. Dahil magkakasama lahat, bawat unit, bawat team, merong kanya-kanyang responsibilidad. Siyempre, ang disadvantage, dahil malawak na operation yan, kailangan din ng maraming resources. At isa pa, ang pinaka-problema dyan, communication. Gap ng communication. Like sa Pilipinas, Meron na nga tayong PNP. Meron pa yan. Okay? Meron pang challenge. Mag-iimbestiga ang PNP. Di ba? Parehas lang investigating body. Yan. Yun yung mga challenges on communication. Okay? So, this is now our collaborative team. May dumating sa crime scene. Okay? May police officers tayo. May SOCO team tayo. Meron tayong technicians. Okay? Expert sila sa kanilang sariling field like fingerprint, DNA, okay, firearms, and so on. Tapos ipupunta yan sa crime lab. Tapos bahala na yung prosecutors natin na mag-introduce sa ebidensya sa korte. So there you go. That is the summary of the evolution of our CSI or SOCO team. So model 1, ulit yung model 1 natin, traditional model. These are patrol officers. Model 2, crime scene technicians. These are civilian, okay, technicians. Model 3, you have there the major crime squad. These are our SOCO team. Model 4, laboratory crime scientists. And Model 5, collaborative team. Yan. So there you go. That is our SOCO team evolution. So ngayon naman, sino-sino specifically ang members ng SOCO? So explore na natin sila. Ito sabi ko yung tatlo. Minsan, evidence custodian is last driver. Yan po yung makikita. Ito. So, ito yung unang member, specialist, or sometimes we call them as technicians. You check tayo. Sa mga iba, clear po ba or choppy?
Choppy.
Clear, sir. Clear, sir.
Medyo clear, sir. Medyo clear.
Okay, okay.
Sabi po, sir, pahinto-hinto po ng konti.
Choppy siya minsan,
Si
sir.
Mr. Carlo, medyo choppy yung feedback niya. I-try yung i-refresh muna. I-refresh natin para baka yung data consumption. Ganon din nangyayari sa akin pag pag naubusan yung data, magaganyan talaga siya. Okay na ba? Tuloy-tuloy na ba yung boses?
Ngayon po,
Yes,
sir,
sir.
medyo okay na po.
Okay,
Yes,
sige.
okay na po.
Tuloy natin. Yung topic, nasasabayan pa ba?
Yes, sir.
Okay naman?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Okay po.
Okay, sige. Tuloy natin. Okay, sige. So, sabi natin, ito yung tatlo. Now, meron kasi silang mga introduce ngayon na bagong terms. Hindi katulad nung mga old terms. Meron silang introduce like, itong evidence custodian, ang tawag na natin ngayon, evidence recorder. Okay? Evidence recorder. Kasi meron silang in-introduce na evidence collector. Okay? Iba po yung evidence collector sa evidence recorder. Minsan, okay, sa mga stable na crime scene, magkasama po silang dalawa. Yung proper collection, mga ganyan. Tapos yung evidence recorder, or evidence custodian, that's the old term, siya yung maglalagay ng markings, siya yung pipirma. Okay, yan po yung term nila. Pero yung specialist, hindi po yan nagbago. Depende po yan sa need. Okay, depende po yan sa need. Basta ang importante, ito yung three major composition of our SOCO team. And so, isa-isay natin, ano kaya ang mga trabaho ng mga ito? Unahin natin yung team leader natin. Marami po siyang trabaho actually. Remember, magtatrabaho ang SOCO team pag tatawagan sila ng criminal investigator. Pero syempre, hindi si criminal investigator ang tatawag sa SOCO team. Meron po tayong tinatawag na TOC, Tactical Operation Center, Tactical Operation Command. We have what we call as the dispatcher. Tama po ba? Kasi may tinawag na crime, sabi ng first responder, ako po ang pupunta, malapit ako sa crime scene. Tapos yung first responder, cordon the crime scene, conduct initial interview, call for the presence or the arrival of the investigator on case. Itong si investigator ng case, pagdating niya, i-assess niya kaagad. Nako, kailangan ko ng SOCO. Tatawagan niya kaagad yung SOCO. Pero yung tatawagan niya is the TOC. Okay? Kailangan ko ng SOCO. Tapos yung Tactical Operations Center natin, sila ang tatawag sa presence ng SOCO team. Pagdating ng SOCO team sa crime scene, okay, the team leader, ito ang kanyang unang trabaho. Siya ang magkocontrol. Kasi meron tayong tinatawag na turnover. The turnover of the crime scene by the criminal investigator to the SOCO team leader. Kaya nga siya team leader. Okay? So, ensure safety. Okay? I-run down natin yung tawag dito, yung trabaho nila. Kasi marami ito, hindi ito ang focus natin. Okay? Hindi ito ang focus natin. Ang importante, ma-identify natin kung sino sila. Ang importante, magkaroon lang tayo ng idea kung ano yung trabaho ng bawat isa. But not in detail. Not in detail. Padaanan lang natin. Yan. Maalala niyo ba ito? Initial survey. Tatlo po ang terms na pwede natin gamitin dyan. Initial survey, preliminary survey, yung common na ginagamit natin, walkthrough. If you're familiar with the term. Initial survey, preliminary survey, walkthrough. Papasok kasi si team leader. Magkakandak siya ng walkthrough. Eyes on yun. Okay? I-assess niya. Anong klaseng crime scene meron ako? Anong klaseng evidence ang pwede kong makolekt? At ano-ano kaya ang trabaho ng membro ng aking team? Yan ang kanyang reason for conducting the initial survey. Yan. Rin ang magdedetermine, okay, kung anong klaseng crime scene search technique ang ikakandak. Yan, mangyayari yan sa initial survey. Sa step-by-step procedure ng crime scene processing, makukover din po natin yan. Okay, mag-alala. Okay? After that, ito pa. Isa pang importante na word, okay, na may encounter natin sa crime scene processing is this one, command post. In other books, they call it forward command post. Ibig sabihin nun, meron silang area sa crime scene kung saan doon sila magde-designate ng parang sa ibang countries, yung sasakyan mismo nila, yung command post nila. Pag merong crime scene sa school, typically, the guardhouse becomes the command post. Depending on the area or the location. What is important is to establish command post. Ano ba yung EIO? To ensure exchange of information. Kasi pag may media dyan, maalala niyo yung nangyari sa grandstand, yung media na-violate yung protocol. Sila ang magko-control. Kasi, for communications, dito lang sa command post mangyayari. Kaya very important yung team leader, i-establish niya kung i-assess na yung crime scene. Pag malawak yung crime scene, saan ang pinaka-strategic location na maglagay siya ng command post. Okay? So, command post, forward command post, or yung ibang term, crime scene command post. O simply command post. Coordinate with other law enforcement agencies. Okay? Lalo na itong supplies na yan. Control the access of people. Okay? Entry and exit. Okay? Kahit pa dignitarian, artista yan, okay? Politika yan, hindi po sila pwedeng pumasok. Because the crime scene is now under the authority of the team leader. Siya lang po ang makakapagdikta kung sino ang papasok at lalabas sa ating crime scene. Yan. At isa pang importante na role ng team leader is kapag tapos na lahat yung processing ng crime scene, i-release niya yung crime scene. Kanino niya i-release? Sa investigator on case. So nung una, yung investigador, pinasa na yung crime scene sa team leader. Sabi niya, ikaw na mong bahala. Mag-kolekta ka na ng evidence. Kapag yung yung team leader, tapos na silang mangolekta, ibabalik na yung authority ng crime scene kay investigator on case. Ano kasi ang implication nito? Anong importance? Ang importance kasi niyan is, once the team leader declares that the crime scene is completely parang processed, natapos yung kanilang crime scene processing, hindi po sila basta-basta pwedeng bumalik. Re-entry on the crime scene will now require a search warrant. Yan. Ganyan po ka-stricto ang ating crime scene processing. Kaya meron tayong tinatawag na release of the crime scene. Yan. So, in other teams, pwede rin meron tayong tinatawag na designated assistant team leader. By the word assistant, syempre siya ang mag-a-assist, siya ang tutulong. Okay? Magte-take over ng responsibilities ng team leader and so on. Photographer, syempre. Marami pong trabaho ang photographer. Okay? Siya po ang pinaka-stable at pinaka-constant na nandoon sa loob ng crime scene. Okay? explain po natin mamaya sa flow ng crime scene investigation. Sketcher, syempre. Sa board exam, meron pa yung tanong na ano yung tawag natin doon sa orientation natin kung paano natin may o-orient yung location ng crime scene. Yung arrow, tsaka letter N. Ayan. Maalala niyo po ba yun? Lumabas po yun minsan eh. Arrow, tsaka letter N. Okay. Yung legend, kompleto na yun. Okay? Pero meron yung isa, yung arrow lang, tsaka letter N. Anong tawag natin doon? We call it compass direction or compass designation. Yan. Indicating that in a particular sketch, yan, you are going to have the idea, yun, tama po. Tama po. Compass navigation, compass direction, compass designation. Ito yung trabaho ng ito, sketchers natin. Siyempre, meron tayong dalawang klase ng sketch. Rough sketch, finished or final sketch. Yan, may explore po natin yan. That's one of our discussion later on. Okay, so sabi natin kanina, yung custodian natin, evidence custodian, okay, pakipansin po ito kasi yung isang term na ginagamit nila is evidence recorder. Yan. Sa kanya yung yung pinaka-importante na trabaho nila na maintain the preserved evidence. Basta pag preservation of evidence, hindi po nawawala itong word na to, chain of custody. Okay? Tapos, si recorder, siya yung magpa-package, magta-transport sa crime lab. Siya yung pipirma dyan. Okay? Mag-uusap sila ng investigator on case, yung IOC, which is the word IOC. Mag-uusap sila, sila yung magpipirmahan. Sasabihin niya sa IOC, sir, ito yung nakolek namin. Meron kami nakolek na shell. Okay, meron siyang markings. Okay, nakalagay dito sa paper envelope. Pirmahan mo ito, sir, tapos i-turn over mo sa akin. Yan ang mangyayari sa chain of custody. Yan, marami po siyang trabaho. Tignan nyo. Okay? Yan. Yan. Tapos, aside from that, meron si evidence recovery personnel. Okay, evidence recovery personnel. In other words, ito si evidence collector. So siya yung kasama ni evidence recorder or evidence custodian. Yan. Ito po yung updates natin pagdating sa ating personnel or members ng ating SOCO team. And then, okay, depende sa nature ng crime scene natin, na mangangailangan tayo ng tinatawag nila na specialist. Yung mga picture natin. So, anong tawag natin sa mag-i-examine sa body of the dead victim? We call him the pathologist. Okay, pathologist. Nandito po sa baba kanina. Ito mga ito. Sinampulan lang po natin. Pathologist. Yan. Yan. We have anthropologist. Ano po ito? Involves plants. So we have a botanist, soil, geologist, okay, yan, and so on. So, wait lang. Okay. So, tapos na tayo sa members ng SOCO team. Okay na. So, basically, we were able to cover yung pinaka-importante na topics, okay, na kailangan nating malaman pagdating sa introduction ng special crime. So ngayon naman, ang next na topic na natin, punta na tayo sa procedure. Okay? Punta na tayo sa processes. Kung ano ang mangyayari, kung ano ang gagawin ng ating SOCO team. By the way, ang term natin doon is crime scene processing, wherein they're going to process the crime scene. So ito, hindi po mawawala ito. Collection, marking, tagging, preservation, and maintaining the chain of custody. Okay. So, ito yung old na practice. Ano nandyan? Kapag wala yung SOCO, ano kaya ang flow? Una, siyempre, ni-report yung insidente. May nangyaring incident, ni-report sa police. Yung nakatanggap yung ating dispatcher. So, tinawagan niya si first responder. Akalain nyo, ang daming trabaho ni first responder. Tama po ba? Meron po tayong board exam question. para ma-break yung discussion natin. Sabi niya, upon arrival at the crime scene, makinig, what is the first thing that the first responder must do? Yan. Sa tingin niyo, ano daw yung pinakauna na dapat gawin ng first responder pagdating niya sa crime scene? Cordon, secure, yan. Yan ang ano natin, yan yung anong tawag diyan? Yan yung anong tawag diyan? Yan yung unang initial na ano, nasa isip natin. Bigyan ko kayo ng tip. Hindi po siya cordon eh. Hindi po siya cordon. Hindi rin po save the victim or save life. This has something to do with the integrity of the evidence to be collected or integrity of the case when you are now presenting your case in court. So meron siyang relationship sa korte. This is something that you do in your tickler. Oh, maalala niyo po ba yung tickler? Yung pinagsusulatan ng pulis. So nandun na eh. It has something to do with tickler. Alam nyo, yung kaso natin sa Pilipinas, nagtatagal po yan ng 4 years, 5 years, mga ganyan. Hindi po mabilisan ng kaso. Ipapatawag ka pag na-transfer ka na ng unit. Pero syempre, ikaw ang investigador, so kailangan ikaw ang mag-report. So, ano yung note-taking? Ano yung gagawin? Tama, take notes. Pero anong iti-take notes mo? Uy, board exam question po ito. What is the very first thing? So, in our initial idea, it's cordon the crime scene, save lives. But no, in the court practice, okay? Or even in our board exam, hindi po yan ang unang gagawin natin. Yun, very good. Pero ito yung ano, isulat natin. Okay. Pero po bang nakaguess niyan? Record the date and time of arrival as well as the weather condition. Yan daw po ang unang gagawin before anything else. Sinong may trabaho niyan? Ang first responder po natin. Kasi sometimes, in some cases, first responders are being requested to testify in court. Lalong-lalo na pag matagal na panahon na yan, sila pang mag-establish anong oras nangyari, anong oras yung dumating, at ano yung weather condition. Bakit importante yung weather condition? Because it will establish the condition of the evidence present at the crime scene. Is it windy day? Is it sunny day? Is it rainy day? About the lighting condition, is it well lighted? Is it poorly lighted? Naka-take note po yan. Okay, so before you cordon the crime scene, very important, record the date, the time, and the weather condition. Lalong-lalo na ngayon, meron na po tayong PST or Philippine Standard Time na sinusunod. Kaya sa report writing, maalala niyo ba sa report writing, pinagbabawal nila na isulat mo at exactly 7 p.m. Tama po ba? Ano po yung turo sa atin sa report writing? At about or at around. You have to estimate. You are not sure. Diba? Yan po yung rule natin sa report writing. Ito po yung gamit niya sa korte. Okay? So, there you go. On or about. Tama po. So, ito yung first responder. Save lives. Take dying declaration. Ano po yung Latin maxim ng dying declaration? We call it sticulo mortis. Okay? Sticulo mortis. Yan yung dying declaration. Meron po tayong tanong din sa board exam sa dying declaration. Pero i-explain natin mamaya, okay? So lahat ito gagawin niya. No? Pagdating ni first responder, ang susunod, papasok na po si IOC o si investigator on case. Tapos, ito na po yung kanyang trabaho. So pag mapapansin nyo, kapag wala yung SOCO, kay investigator on case, yung crime scene processing. Which is not supposed to be because investigators on case are not trained. They have an idea on how to gather evidence, but they do not have the training, the skill, and even the tools to process a particular crime scene. Okay? Kaya nga ang rule natin, hintayin mo si SOCO. Pero sabi natin, in rural areas, okay, yung mahirap ma-access, pag may nangyaring crime, tapos nakita mo yung evidence, pag-uulan, masisira yung ebidensya. Well, common sense or logic will dictate you that you have the right as the investigator to process or to collect that particular evidence. Pero syempre, sabi natin, halos lahat na ng probinsya Meron na pong SOCO. So ganito na po ang mangyayari sa setup natin kung anong mangyayari pag may ni-report na crime. May ni-report. So ito yon. Dumating yung first responder. Marami pa rin silang trabaho. Okay? Pero sabi natin, huwag kakalimutan, record the date, the time of arrival, and the weather condition. IOC. Pagdating ni IOC, i-assess niya. Okay? Magkakandak ng initial. Okay? Preliminary. So tatanong niya. Tatanong niyo yung patrol officer, sir, anong kaso? Yan. Tapos, magre-request siya ng SOCO assistance. Tapos, pagdating ng SOCO, magkakaroon ng turnover. Maalala niyo po ba ito? Yung turnover. Turnover ni IOC kay SOCO team leader. Tapos si SOCO team leader, okay, marami silang tatrabahoin. Ang tawag po natin dito is crime scene processing. Ito po lahat yan. Pagkatapos nun, pag nakompleto na, sabi natin, there is now the release of the crime scene from the SOCO team leader to the IOC. Ibabalik ni SOCO team yung crime scene kay IOC. Pag makikita nyo na nakalagay po sa Philippine National Police Operational Procedure, naka-rule po yan. Hindi, kailangan pong mangyari ito. Okay, hindi pwedeng hindi ma-release ang crime scene. Okay, kasi pag ni-release mo yung crime scene, ibig sabihin nun, kompleto na yung processing. Hindi mo na pwedeng balikan yan. Not unless you will secure again a search warrant. So, there you go. This is our typical process of crime scene investigation. Okay. So, sabi natin, unahin na natin, isa-isain na natin yung mga trabaho nila. So, we have here the first responder. Okay. So, ito yung legal basis niya. Kaya pag makikita nyo talaga, okay, importante ang role ng first responder natin. Sila kasi ang unang darating sa ating crime scene. So, nandito, cordon the crime scene with whatever material available. Meron tayong human barricade, for example. Okay? Pag wala lahat yan, may human barricade tayo. Yung human barricade, hindi po yung tatayo yung mga tao, dugtong-dugtong, tapos i-stretch yung kamay. Okay? Hindi po yung human barricade. Wala pong konseptong ganun. Ang human barricade is, i-identify mo yung key areas na kakailangan mo ng barricade, like entry and exit, doors, windows. Yun ang babantayan ng humans. Okay? Just in case, okay, you will need any, okay, cordoning of the crime scene. Evacuate. Okay? Kaya nga sa PNP natin, meron tayong talagang body system. Sometimes first responders, they respond in pairs, even to the point they have their vehicles. Sometimes, if a crime is committed, halos sabay na darating yung first responder at investigator on case. Okay? Magkasunod, hindi magkasabay. So pagdating ng first responder, kakukordon pa lang, nandun na si investigator. Meron po ganyang instances. So automatic na po yun, ka-investigator na lahat. Siya na ang magdidikta. Yung first responder, gagawin lang po niyang taga-control sa crowd sa crime scene. Yan. May instances po na gano'n. And then prepare to take dying declaration. Ito. May lumabas kasing tanong sa board exam. So, ano daw ang unang itatanong ng first responder sa isang tao, okay, para makategorize siya na dying declaration? So, ulitin natin yung tanong. If you are the first responder, you proceeded to the crime scene, okay? And then you're able to see a person who is about to die. And he is softly saying some words, okay? What is the first question that you are going to ask? Yun. So, klaro ba yung tanong natin? Ano yung una mong itatanong? So, let's try to participate, okay? Lagyan natin ng letter. Letter A. What is your name? What is your name? Letter B. Who did this to you? Tama po. Who did this to you? Letter C. Are you aware of the fact that you are about to die? Or D. What other information can you share to me? Again. A. What is your name? B. Who did this to you? C. Are you aware that you are about to die? Or D. What other information can you share to me? So, syempre, mag-eliminate tayo. Yung letter D na what other information, maling-mali po yan. Tama po ba? Hindi po natin pagpipilian yan. Pati yung letter A, what is your name? Is not the first thing that you're going to ask to someone who is about to tell a dying declaration. Kasi there are many ways and means for you to later identify his identity or to later establish kung sino siya. Wallets, picture, Facebook pa lang, malalaman mo na yan. Di ba? So, nasa Bravo or Charlie tayo. Who did this to you or are you aware that you're about to die? Of course, logically, tatanungin mo sino may kagagawan yan. Pero in the rules, remember, we follow rules. In the rules, you have to establish letter C. So, ang sagot natin doon, letter C. Ano po ba yung letter C? You have to establish the fact that the declarant is aware of his imminent death. Kalahin mo, di ba? Tatanungin mo, sir. Pero yung sa magandang paraan, hindi yung, sir, alam mo na bang mamamatay ka na? Hindi po, okay? Hindi po ganoon. Marami pong paraan para establish, sir. Alam mo ba na sa sugat mo na yan, baka matuluyan ka? Yung mga ganong statement. Okay? What is important is, you establish his consciousness and awareness of his imminent death. Kasi, pag hindi siya aware, hindi na-establish yan, magiging hearsay evidence po yan. Hindi po yan magiging dying declaration. Yan. So, if you have questions, you reserve them later on. Baka may follow-up question kayo doon. But that is one of the important job a first responder must do whenever he arrives at a crime scene and someone is going to stipulate his, ano na ulit yun? Sticulo mortis or dying declaration. Yan. Okay, so ito pa yung duties niya. Tuloy natin. The first responder shall stay at the crime scene to assist the IOC. So pagdating ng IOC, sabi nga natin, automatic mako-convert yung first responder na assistant na lang siya. Either taga-bantay sa crime scene, yung nakordonan, taga-relay ng information, taga-control sa media, and so on. Ang importante doon, stay and assist. Okay? Maintenance of security, crime control, preservation of evidence, custody of witness and suspects. Maalala niyo po ba? Pag there are several witnesses, there are several suspects, they have to be separated and isolated. Tama po ba? Para matanggal yung baka ma-influensyan yung statement ng bawat witness or suspect natin. Yan. Okay. Ano pa? Yan. The first responder, yung matindi na trabaho ng first responder natin. Court duties. Yan. I-request po sila na mag-testify sa korte. Yan. Prevent entry or exit. So, make notes of names of possible. Kaya meron tayong tinatawag na control access log. Logbook po yun. Control access, listahan ng mga pwedeng pumasok sa crime scene. Kung sino yung pumasok, kung sino yung lumabas. Trabaho po yan ng first responder. Sa pang trabaho ng first responder is i-brief niya yung IOC pagdating ng IOC sa crime scene. So, sir, ito po yung initial na investigation ko. Yan ang i-relay niya kay IOC. Okay, so ito yung requisites ng dying declaration. Ito yung letter A. Nakita niyo po ba yung letter A? That the death is imminent and the declarant is conscious of the fact. So, kailangang establish po natin ito before anything else. Okay? So, before anything else, establish mo muna yan. Yan. Okay, that's the requisites of dying declaration. May encounter nyo sa other subjects natin. Okay, so, there you go. For the first part, ito na po yung parang main topic natin. So, imagine, ang dami nating introduction. Pero ito yung main topic natin. This is now the gist, okay? The meat of what is crime scene investigation all about. This is where you can now have the idea on the process. Specific na po ito, step-by-step process on what is transpiring in a particular crime scene processing. Okay? So, yung FBI, sila po ang nagbigay niyan. Okay? 11 stages. I believe na-share ko po yan sa notes na binigay sa inyo. So, 11 stages, akalain mo ang daming steps po yan. So, iisa-isahin po natin. Pero ang ginawa ko, bago natin iisa-isahin, i-summarize muna natin. So, ito po yung summary niya. So, ito yung old, 2010. Sa operational procedure manual, 7 lang po yan. Yun po yung old. Okay, yan po yung old. Pero sa new, sa FBI, naging 11 po yan. Pero sabi natin, i-summarize muna natin. Okay. So, ito yung statement nila. The criminalistics, or sometimes known as the SOCO team, shall enter the crime scene only after proper coordination with the IOC and even signing a particular document. Ito po yung turnover of crime scene by IOC to SOCO team leader. Okay, so ito na yung scenario. Si team leader, papasok muna sa crime scene. Siya lang po. Okay, siya lang po. Cautiously. Oh, teka, meron siyang kasama, si photographer. I'm sorry, nakalimutan ko. Dalawa silang papasok. Okay, so papasok muna si team leader, cautiously, eyes only ito, okay? Kasama niya si photographer, nakukuha ng initial photograph. Very importante po si photographer, di ba? All throughout the process, nandyan po talaga si photographer. Okay, so, ano yung reason kung bakit si team leader muna ang papasok? Kaya nandiyan yung question, why should the team leader be the first person to enter the crime scene? Ito, syempre, hazards or danger. Baka naman delikado yung building. Baka naman nandun pa yung suspect, hindi pa na-clear. Kailangan mo nang malaman yan ng team leader kasi syempre, priority pa rin yung buhay ng members ng SOCO team. Second, determine the nature of the crime and possible pieces of evidence. So, maalala niya sa investigation, importante po ito. Kaya nga sabi natin, meron tayong merong intuition yung team leader. Determine the nature of the crime. So sa nature of the crime, in the same report writing, hindi po homicide, murder, parricide, hindi po kasi mga legal terms po ang mga yan. Specifically, we're going to identify incidents like, is this a stabbing incident? Is this a shooting incident? Is this a mauling incident? Yung mga ganyan. Yan ang mga i-identify natin na hindi rape, murder, suicide, hindi po. Is this a sexual assault? Mga ganyan ang i-question niya. Siyempre, kapag yung nasa isip shooting incident, the nature of the crime, what are the probable pieces of evidence that would be collected at the crime scene? Kaya nga, nakasama dito, possible pieces of evidence. Barilan, natural yung baril, natural yung bala, natural yung shell. Yan ang ibig sabihin nito. Okay? Isa pa, bakit una siyang papasok? Kasi ito, i-identify niya. Ano yung klaseng search ang kailangan na pwedeng i-employ? So remember, standard, pag outdoor, ang recommended is zone search. Sometimes, they call it grid search. Hahatiin po yan sa 4 quadrants. Pag indoors, na-encounter niyo po ba, ano yung generally recommended search technique for indoor crime scenes? Okay, may nagsabi ng wheel. Ano pa? Parang si Mr. Solis yung pinaka-attentive natin na strip. Okay, nakadalawa yung strip. Sa tingin nyo, may nabasa ba kayong, ano yung reference? So, meron tayong, again, yung kinuhanan ko ng reference, yung libro ni Montojo. Well-cited kasi yung libro ni Montojo. Pag outdoor daw, zone. Okay? Siya kasi yung, yung, maalala nyo ba yung, yung sketching niya? Meron siyang sketch, siya kasi nanggaling yun, sketch of grounds, sketch of locality, sketch of details. Kay Montojo po nanggaling yun. Okay? So, is it between spiral and strip? Between spiral and strip. Yan. Sa source ni Montojo, ang in-identify niya na pinaka-recommended is spiral search. Okay? Akala ko noon is strip search. Pero huwag kayong mag-alala. Pag nandun tayo sa search techniques, makukover po natin yan. Okay? That's part of our topic for this session to discuss all of those search techniques. Okay, moving on. So, pagpasok ng team leader, nakakita siya ng sign of life. Okay, may buhay. Okay? So, anong gagawin? Si team leader, automatic, tatawagin niya si medical legal officer para i-affirm niya if there is signs of life. Yan. Dito sa sa amin sa Baguio, ang kagandahan sa Baguio, yung team leader, siya na mismo yung medical legal officer. Ang galing. Okay? Yung team leader ng SOCO, siya na yung medical legal. So, meron na siyang authority para mag-declare. But in cases na yung team leader, hindi medical legal officer, syempre, ang tatawagin niya is the medical legal officer. Bakit? Meron po tayong rule. A police officer, a first responder, an investigator on case, a criminal investigator, have no authority whatsoever to declare death. Maalala niyo po ba yun? Hindi po pwedeng basta-basta magde-declare kung patay or buhay yung biktima sa crime scene. Wala po silang legal authority. Only the physician or members of the EMS. Sino yung EMS natin? The Emergency Medical Service has the authority to declare death. Maalala niyo yung DOA. Ano na yung DOA? Dead on arrival. Sa hospital po yun. DOS. Dead on the spot. Yan. So yung dead on the spot, ang authorized na mag-declare lang po niyan is yung medical legal officer. Ang susunod na tanong, bakit? Ano ang importansya ng declaration of death or declaration of signs of life? Ano yung importansya? Siyempre, para may guide ka kung itatakbo mo ba yan sa ospital or hindi. For example, pagpasok mo, unconscious. Remember sa ABC, check airway, breathing, circulation. Check mo lahat. No signs of life. No external injuries visible. Wala kang makitang injuries. Pero wala talagang airway, breathing, circulation. Tanong, itatakbo mo siya sa ospital? Oo naman. As first responder, di ba? As investigator in case, you are not a physician. You are not authorized to declare that. So you have no choice. Bring him to the hospital. Pero paano pag ganito? Pagdating mo sa crime scene, nakita mo, okay, yung ulo, wala na. Okay? Na-squish. Labas na yung utak. Tapos sasabihin mo, yung turo sa amin, hindi ako pwedeng mag-declare kung patay ito o hindi na. So itakbo ko muna sa ospital. Okay? Gagawin mo ba yun? Common sense will dictate. Common sense will tell you na, syempre, wala na. O, tama po, common sense. Labas na yung tiyan. Okay? Labas na yung, yung internal organ. Sasabihin mo, nako, hindi ako doktor, hindi ko pwedeng i-declare na patay ito. Tapos kinuha mo yung internal, nilagay mo sa loob ng katawan, tapos itatakbo sa ospital. Hindi po pwede. Common sense. Okay? Yan po ang reason for declaration or not. Okay, so yan ang trabaho ng ating medical legal officer. So if there is signs of life, they are now going to retrieve the victim. Ilalagay sa isang safe place, okay? Or bibigyan ng first aid or dadalhin sa crime scene. Okay? Or baka wala na yung victim natin, dinala na ni first responder. Okay. Now, while this is happening, maalala niyo po ba yung command post natin? Ito po. Meron tayong tinatawag na command post or crime scene command post. So habang nangyayari ito, nandun si team leader, nandun si photographer, nandun si medical legal officer, yung other members ng SOCO team mag-a-assess na sila. Mag-set up na sila ng tinatawag nila na command post. So anong sabi doon? The command post must be free, secured from disturbance during the crime scene processing. May follow-up yan. What is the significance of a crime scene command post? Bakit importante ang command post natin? Ito ay magiging venue for coordinating instruction. Dito sila magkukumpol, magkakaroon ng briefing. Magpapabriefing kasi ang team leader. Okay? Pagkatapos nilang mag-conduct ng walkthrough. Remember? Walkthrough, preliminary survey, or initial survey. Tapos, yung crime scene command post is a temporary secured area kung saan doon mo pwedeng ilagay yung equipment at yung ebidensya. There are certain instances that the evidence custodian or the evidence recorder does not enter already the crime scene. Meron pong ganun. Nandun lang sa command post. Tapos yung magta-turn over sa kanya is yung collector, yung evidence collector. Okay? Yung crime scene evidence custodian, nandun lang siya nakaupo. Tapos inaayos na yung ebidensya na binibigay sa kanya. Saan siya nakaupo? Sa command post. Okay? Doon siya mahanapan. Another purpose for establishing command post is media and persons inquiry. Sila ang magko-control. Parang siya, front desk, information desk. Para hindi sila basta-basta nakakapasok sa crime scene. And syempre, for communications, okay? So this is a typical example, okay? Balang araw, ang Pilipinas, magkakaroon na ng ganyan. Okay? Ito po ang typical na sa other countries, ano, na SOCO vehicle, ano, not SOCO, CSI vehicle nila. So, balang araw yung SOCO natin, meron na. O, tignan nyo to. Kompleto kasi ito. Sa loob, okay, yung equipments nandyan na. So, sabi nga natin, in outdoor crime scenes, ano ito malawakan? Mga search ang mga yan, search and rescue. Yung vehicle mismo is already their command post. Yan. Ganyan po ang command post. Pero, ito ang meron tayo. Diba? Aking problema sa ating bansa eh. So dapat yun yung areas kung saan tayo mag-improve. Lalo na sa evidence control, preservation of para yung mga kaso, yung mga evidence na kukolekta, hindi nasasayang. Kasi yung mga police natin talagang they are very vigilant in collecting evidence. The only challenge or the gap there is yung yung establishment, yung processing, yung mga ganyan. Okay. So, tuloy na natin. So pagkatapos na retrieve yung ating victim, si team leader, okay, si photographer, babalik na sila sa command post. Bakit sila babalik? Kasi meron na silang idea kung anong nandun sa crime scene. Ano mangyayari? Magpapa-briefing si Soko team leader. So briefing will be done and it will be conducted by the Soko team leader. So, patapos ng briefing, ano nang mangyayari sa briefing? Ano mangyayari sa briefing? Distribution of roles. So sabi na, nako, meron tayong gunshot, parang may nagbarilan. So yung specialist na kailangan natin, meron tayong firearms examiner natin, mangangailangan tayo. Parang may nakita din akong fingerprint doon. Pwedeng i-dust natin yon. So mangangailangan tayo ng fingerprint technician. May nakita din akong dugo doon. So mangangailangan tayo ng blood pattern analyst. Yan kasi yung term sa kanila, blood pattern analyst. Yan ang mangyayari sa ating briefing process or briefing phase. So pagkatapos niyan, yung mga searchers natin, okay, dalawa or marami pa, yung mga specialist natin, itong mga yan, ang dami nila. Tapos yung photographer, babalik ulit sila sa crime scene. This time, oriented na sila, so alam na nila ang kanilang ginagawa. So, yung mga searcher, they are now going to search for evidence. Tapos, maglalagay sila ng placard. So, siguro, nung crime scene processing kayo, nung nag-aaral pa kayo, nung na-encounter nito yung subject na to, baka kayo pa yung gumawa ng placard, di ba? Numbers po yan. Yung body of the victim, sinasama numbers. Tama po ba? Pero ngayon, the SOCO procedure ngayon is letter V na po. Okay? Pag marami sila, V1, V2, V3, mga ganyan. Dati, sinasama kasi yung body of the victim. Siyempre, the numbering, the placing of numbers will depend on the type of search. Tama po ba? The type of the crimes in search. So, pag yung search nila is, yung commonly applied is spiral. Yung spiral po kasi dalawang klase. Inward spiral and outward spiral. Yung inward, syempre, nasa labas kayo, pagpasok nyo sa door, iikot kayo hanggang sa gitna. Kaya tinawag na inward spiral search. Yung outward spiral search, papasok sa loob, iikot, palabas sa crime scene. Yung typical na nangyayari, kung bakit spiral is the common sa mga small crime scenes is, pag nasa gitna yung body of the victim, either, pag inward, iikutan muna lahat ng ebidensya saka pumunta sa body of the victim. Or, reverse naman, dediretso sa body of the victim, ipaprocess, tapos ilalabas, tapos iikot, makongolekta ulit ng evidence. So pag makikita niyo yung markings, yung arrangement ng markings, pag strip yan, syempre dire-diretso. Depende yan sa search technique na kinandak. Okay? Nagets niyo po ba yan? So yan ang gamit ng ating mga searchers. Maglalagay. So aside from yung placard, ano po bang mangyayari doon? I-encircle po nila gamit ang chalk. Siyempre yung body of the victim, yung shape niya, isi-shape po nila. Habang nangyayari yun, remember, the photographer, nakita niyo to? At the same time, the photographer takes photographs and even the numbers of evidence. So this phase is only for documentation and recognition of evidence. Wala pa pong nangyayaring collection phase dito. Okay, parang ano pa lang nila, dinudocument niya lang nila, ina-identify pa lang nila, nire-recognize pa lang nila yung evidence. Anong susunod na dito? Yan. So, outdoor crime scene kasi ito, hindi sa rather outside countries. Okay? Hirap pong mag-search pag mga ganyang instances. Kasi outdoor yan. So, makikita nyo is strip po yan. Linya yan, diretso lahat yan. Okay. So, pagkatapos na yung mga searchers, nalagay nila yung placard, aalis po sila. They will vacate. Imagine, no? Para hindi maraming nasa loob ng crime scene, meron po silang kanya-kanyang rule. So, pagkatapos na nag-search, na encircle, na lagyan ng placard na picturean, lalabas po sila. Pero syempre, yung photographer, hindi po yan lalabas. Very crucial talaga ang trabaho niyan. Pipicturean niya lahat. Okay, nang nilagyan nila ng placard. Pero yung mga searcher, tapos na yung trabaho nila, na-search na nga nila. Kasi ang susunod, syempre, sinong susunod? Yan, si photographer talaga. Okay? The placard. Yan. Ang susunod, si evidence custodian. Ano na ulit yung term kay evidence custodian? Evidence recorder. Sinong kasama niya? Si evidence collector. Okay? Pero nung old practice, evidence custodian lang. Nadagdagan lang kasi ng term. Okay? So, ito na. Meron siyang tinatawag na evidence recovery log. Logbook po ito. Listahan lang lahat ng ebidensya. Dapat nakatali po ito sa photograph. Kaya dapat coordinated po yung trabaho ng evidence custodian sa photographer. Kasi yung photographer, take photos before, during, after. Bago pa makolekta yung evidence, nung kinokolekta na yung evidence, nung pagkatapos ng kolektahin yung evidence. Yan. So, as custodian collects the evidence, so kukolektahin na niya. Tapos ilalagay niya sa proper container. Tapos lalagyan niya ng labeling. Diba? Yung markings. Pero pwede pang ilagay ng tagging. Okay? Na tagging. Tapos lalagyan ng seal. Lalagyan ng counter signature. Ang dami pong trabaho ng evidence custodian natin. Siyempre, habang nangyayari yun, yung photographer, pipicturean pa rin niya yan. Imagine. Okay? Sabi natin, each evidence has its own appropriate container. Yan. Yun yung rule natin. Like, example, yung typical example, pag mayroong clothing, okay, hindi po diretso na ganyan. Okay, lalagyan po siya ng cardboard at shirt. May gunpowder, may butas yung shirt. Lalagyan po ng cardboard sa loob. Okay, para i-separate yung front shirt sa back shirt. Yung mga collection processes or procedures. Okay, kailangan din po nating maging aware sa mga evidence at yung proper collection nila. Yan. So, after collection of evidence collector tsaka yung assistant babalik ulit sa crime scene command post. Nakolekta lahat ng ebidensya. Okay? Tapos nang ma-record na picturean ng photographer. So, babalik ulit. Okay? Babalik na sila sa crime scene. Tapos, si team leader magkakaroon ulit ng briefing. Okay? Sometimes they call it debriefing. Okay? Patapos na ito eh. Okay? Nakolekta na lahat eh. Pero, okay? Kailangan nilang i-recheck. Okay? This time, papasok na sila, magkakaroon na ng tinatawag na final survey. Yung final survey, yan na. They are now going to survey the crime scene for possible discarded or unattended evidence. Baka meron kasing nakaligtaan or hindi napansin na ebidensya. So for the second time and for the final time, they are now going to conduct their final survey. Sometimes yung final survey, pag yung room is clear naman, usually strip. Okay? Or line lang siya. Pag hindi sila kontento, double strip. Dodoble nila. Okay? Yan po yung gamit usually ng strip search or line search. Nasa final survey po yan. Yan. So, pag nag-final survey na, lahat na ng members ito, okay? Para ma-maximize yung kanilang presence sa crime scene, para ma-detect nila kung merong nakaligtaan na evidence. Ito na. Pagkatapos ng final survey, ito na siya. Ito turn over na ni SOCO team leader yung crime scene sa investigator on case. Okay, so during this moment, there is now already signing. Okay, meron kasing form yan na dapat na pirmahan. So, there you go. That is the summary. So, summary pa lang po yun. Ito na po yung specific na binigay ng Federal Bureau of Investigation. Sabi natin, ilan po yung stages? Meron pong 11 stages. Medyo marami ito. Okay? Pero ito ang focus ko. Dito ako magko-concentrate. Nasaan na to? Crime scene documentation. Dito po tayo. Number 6 hanggang number 9. Ito po ang gusto kong i-focus at i-target. Kasi sa crime scene documentation, nandun yung notes taking, photographing, sketching, and searching. Yung apat. Yan po yung basic activity sa crime scene documentation. So we call it crime scene documentation. Ulitin natin. Notes taking, photography, sketching, and crime scene search. Yan, yun yung apat na identify natin. So, with the interest of our time, i-summarize natin. Yung una, preparation and approach. Pag mapapansin nyo po sa mga reports ng team, ng SOCO team, sabi doon na elements or members of the SOCO team headed by police lieutenant so and so, okay, in the vehicle, on the SOCO vehicle with plate number, arrive at the crime scene on or about, okay, this time, this date, with a sunny weather condition or with rainy weather condition, okay, was able to arrive. Dito po yun. Okay? Kasi habang nakasakay daw, dapat may briefing na. Yan, yun yung preparation and approach. Now, pagdating nila, si team leader, secure and protect the scene. Sabi nga natin, check the crime scene. Okay? Determine hazards or dangers para ma-prioritize yung safety ng SOCO team. Susunod na, maalala nyo to, papasok na si team leader to conduct preliminary survey, initial survey, or walkthrough to determine the nature of the crime, the piece of evidence to be collected, and the manner or the technique or the crime scene search technique to be employed. Tapos, determine what are possible pieces of evidence that are available, make a narrative description, yung notes taking po ito, picture the crime scene, sketch or diagram, conduct a detailed search, record and collect, ito na yung recording, yung paglagay ng data, conducting final survey, and release of the crime scene. So, napaka-lengthy po ito na activity ng SOCO team natin pagdating nila sa isang crime scene. So, preparation and approach. Ano po ang kailangang mangyari? Yan. Maghanda ka muna. Like, kailangan ba natin ng search warrant? Okay? Legal ramification yon, legal requirements. Kailangan siguraduhin nila yan. Dapat mag-briefing lahat. Tapos preparation and approach. So, sino yung in charge? Siyempre, team leader yan, automatic. Okay? Consider safety and comfort. Organize communication with support services. Ibig sabihin nito, yung kailangan natin ng emergency medical service, ambulance, and so on. Fire truck, baka kailangan natin. Yan. Yan. Organize command post. Hindi po mawawala ito. Communication, decision making, okay, temporary quarters. Yan po yung una. Okay, preparation and approach. Secure and protect. Okay? Ganito pong gawin natin ha. Okay lang po ba sa inyo? Ganito yung phase natin dito kasi mag-focus na tayo sa crime scene documentation. So, secure and protect, secure, control the crime scene. Okay? Up to what extent the crime scene has been protected. Ibig sabihin nito yung cordon. Kasi minsan, first responders, investigator on case, nagiging ano sila, nagiging nagpapanik, nagiging OA. Kaya kahit isang building yung nangyari ng crime scene, kinordon nila pati yung ano, yung right of way, yung daanan. O yung road, hindi pwede yun, kailangan ma-maintain yun. So, sabi doon, sa principle ng cordoning, it is better to cordon it in a wider area than in a smaller area. Because a wide area that is cordoned can be limited or controlled, but a very controlled area is very difficult to improve or enhance or widen. Yan po yung role natin sa cordoning ng crime scene natin. Crime scene security, trabaho po yan ng first responder natin. Obtain information of witnesses. Okay? Sa protect the scene pa lang tayo. Take extensive notes. Okay? Notes taking na kaagad. Keep out. Ayan. Kaya meron tayong tinatawag na control access log. Yung unauthorized, hindi po pwedeng pumasok. Kahit po si mayor yan, kahit si presidente yan. Pag active crime scene yan, ang in charge po dyan, si team leader. Okay. Initiate preliminary survey. Sabi natin, initial survey or walkthrough. So, establish crime scene boundary, systematic search. Okay. Narrative description technique. Acquire preliminary photograph. Kasi kasama ni team leader si photographer. Extent of search area. Okay. Okay. Specific personnel. So, sino yung specialist na kailangan mo? Anong gamit ang kailangan mo? Transient evidence. Yung transient evidence, we call it short-lived evidence. Okay? Ito yung madaling masira na evidence like blood exposed outside. Kailangan pong i-collect ka agad yan. Yan po ang priority na i-collect. General theory of the crime. Ano kaya ang nangyari dito? Yan. Kaya nga, theory is important also. Extensive notes. Okay. Vehicles. Remember, vehicles. Priority, the color of the vehicle. Yan pong unang-una sa board exam. Anong unang ino-note pag mayroong sasakyan? They say it's the color. Okay, yun ang una. Siyempre, vehicle identification number. Okay, license plate. Okay, position of the key. Naka-on ba siya? Naka-off ba? Okay, yung gear shift position. Okay, nasa third gear ba yan? Nasa fifth gear ba yan? Nasa reverse ba yan? Yan. Amount of fuel. Very important ang mga ito, lalo na sa hit and run cases. Mga ganyan. Remember, this is our conveyance crime scene. And then evaluate physical evidence possibilities. By this word, evaluate mo kung anong evidence ang kailangan mo dyan. Okay, let's continue. Yan, okay. Sige. Okay. Skip natin dito. Narrative description. Take note na. Notes taking po ito. Meron po tayong separate discussion dito. Photograph the crime scene. Meron pa tayong separate discussion dyan. Okay. Marami po kasi ito. Isa-isa. Sketching, may separate discussion din tayo dito. Ito yung sabi natin, compass orientation or compass direction. Medyo lumabas po ito minsan. Yung arrow tsaka letter N. Okay. Yan, ang daming requirements sa sketching. Search techniques. May discussion po tayo dyan separate. Okay. Detailed search. Ang dami pong guidelines ito. Okay. Ito na. Crime scene documentation. Next PowerPoint presentation po. Ito yung focus natin. Crime scene documentation meaning is this is now the process where you are now going to document the crime scene itself. You have sketching, photography, yung mga ganyan. Tapos, remember, final survey. Number 10 na po tayo. Final survey is to recheck crime scene. So, sabi dito, all personnel. Yan. So, lahat po ng members ng SOCO team magpa-participate po sila sa final survey. Yan. Okay, final survey. And then, after that, ano na po yung last? Release the crime scene. Turnover na po ito. The crime scene by the investigator, by the team leader back to the investigator on case. Okay. So we are done. Let us have some short assessment questions. May assessment question po tayo. Para yung susunod na crime scene documentation na siya. So ito yung tanong natin. Kumusta? Okay pa ba? Gising pa ba kayo?
Yes, sir. Gising pa po.
Gising pa, sir.
Okay. So ito siya. Tama. SOCO. Sabi natin, crime scene investigation. Okay, mas malawak po ito. Ito po yung term na ginagamit nila sa ibang bansa. Kasama po dito yung interview at arrest. Siyempre, alam na natin yung criminal investigation. Diba? Trabaho yan ng criminal investigator. Crime scene processing, ito yung definition kung saan yung members ng SOCO team magpa-process na sila ng evidence sa crime scene. Okay, next question. It's a very interesting question. Ano ang kailangan nating isubmit sa crime lab for comparison purposes? Yan, good. So, sabi nga natin, It's either known, ito po yung term natin, or standard sample. Tama. So, ang sagot po natin doon, Charlie. Now, ang follow-up question, ano na ang tawag natin sa known or standard sample pag sinubmit na natin sa korte? Maalala niyo po ba yun? Anong tawag natin? Ang tawag, tama, okay. Buti nilang may nakinig. Ang tawag na po natin, exemplar. Now, kapag yung exemplar, inadmit na siya as evidence sa korte, at meron na siyang numbers, ano na pong tawag natin ton? Exemplar magiging exhibit. Very good. So, sabi natin, known or standard sample collected at the crime scene, okay? Introduced into as evidence in court is an exemplar. Marked and accepted as evidence is an exhibit. Okay. Bibigay ako ng sample para may idea po tayo. So, meron pong stage ng trial na tinatawag natin na pre-trial brief or pre-trial conferencing. So, ano pong nangyayari dito? Sa pre-trial brief o pre-trial conferencing, dito po parang ilalatag both ng prosecution at defense lahat ng kanilang evidence. Be that testimonial, documentary, or physical evidence, maglalatagan po sila para walang sorpresa. Para lahat ng both parties, alam nila kung ilang witness ang magte-testify, kung ilang evidence ang ipepresent, kung anong document ng ebidensya ang ipepresent. To avoid surprising evidence. Kasi bawal po ang surprising evidence. Okay? So, ganito ang magiging scenario. Very strict po kasi ang court natin. So, for example, yung prosecution ng mag-i-start. So, yung unang i-establish nila is stipulation of facts. Pag sinabi natin stipulation of facts, i-introduce nila yung mga facts. Example, okay, prosecutor, for the prosecution, proceed, sabi ng judge. So, Your Honor, we would like to stipulate that the victim, okay, Mrs. X or Miss X, was able to arrive at the house of Mr. Y at around 7 p.m. Yan, that is the stipulation of the prosecution. So sabi ng prosecution, dumating daw itong babae sa bahay ng lalaki sa oras ng alas 7 ng gabi. Tapos sasabihin ng judge, oh, defense, what say you? So anong comment nyo doon? Yan. Tapos sasabihin ng defense, we accept, Your Honor. Anong ibig sabihin nun? Tinatanggap ng defense yung stipulation ng prosecution na alas 7, pumasok yung babae sa bahay ng suspect. So anong importansya nun? Well, it will ease the trial kasi yung prosecution, hindi na nila kailangang i-establish yung timeline na yung babae dumating nung alas 7 kasi tanggap ng defense na alas 7 nga siya pumasok. Ano yung susunod? Okay, continue. Sabi ni prosecutor, Your Honor, we would also like to stipulate that upon entry at around 7:30, they had a drinking spree and that they were able to consume 5 bottles of San Miguel beer. Yan. So, sasabihin ni defense, what is your comment? Sasabihin ng defense, we accept, Your Honor. So, the defense admits na nagkaroon ng inuman, nakaubos sila ng 5 bottles ng beer. Okay? Continue. We stipulate, Your Honor, sabi ng prosecution, that Miss X passed out at around 10 p.m. So gustong ipasok ng prosecution na nung nag-inuman sila, itong babae nakakatulog sa oras ng alas 10 ng gabi. So sasabihin ng judge. So, any comment for the defense? Sasabihin ng defense, we do not accept, Your Honor. So, ano nang nangyayari doon? Dahil hindi tinanggap ng defense, it is on the burden of the prosecution to really establish that the woman indeed passed out at around 10 p.m. Gets niyo po ba? Yun pa ang ibig sabihin ng stipulation of facts. So, itong defense naman, i-disprove nila na sa alas 10, gising na gising pa yung babae, sumasayaw pa nga, nagkaraoke pa. Ayan. Yun ang pwede lang ibigay na ebidensya to controvert or to contradict the stipulation by the prosecution. Okay. Nandun po tayo dun sa testimonial evidence po yun. Pasok naman tayo sa physical evidence. ganito pang mangyayari. So, prosecution, what is your first evidence? So, sasabihin ng prosecution, Your Honor, we would like to introduce exemplar. Okay? Exemplar which is placed in a cardboard box. Yan. So, sabi ni clerk of court, very documented po yan. Sabi ni clerk of court, be it noted that I am now holding a cardboard box that is 5 cm by 5 cm. I am now opening the box using a cutter. Yan. Talagang specific po yan. And I am now holding a panty with color red. Yan. So, merong panty na nananapan daw sa crime scene. So, sasabihin ng prosecutor, Your Honor, we pray that the panty be marked as Exhibit A. Tapos sasabihin ni judge, okay, Mark, ito namang si clerk of court, mamarkahan niyo ng letter A. Tapos may continuation. Sasabihin ni prosecutor, Your Honor, we would also pray that the blood stain located at the center of the panty be marked as Exhibit A-1. Yan ang sasabihin niya. Sasabihin ni judge, okay, mark it. So sa isang panty, dalawang exhibit. Exhibit A, yung panty mismo. Exhibit A-1, yung bloodstain. Kapag meron pang other evidence doon, A-2, A-3, A-3, A-4, and so on. Okay? So, yun po ang mangyayari na process. Kapag i-accept yung evidence sa crime, sa korte na yan, ang tawag na po doon, exhibit na po siya. Okay? So, yan, ganyan po ka-importante. Okay? Yung process kung saan tatanggapin yung ating evidence. Okay? So, next na po tayo. Next question na po. Naulit po ito nung yung Q&A natin nung last. So, ito po yung keyword natin. It contains the number of persons who handled and possessed the evidence. Okay, tama po. We call it the chain of custody. Okay. Uy, buhay na buhay. Daming sumagot. Okay, next question na po tayo. In the absence of SOCO, who may conduct crime scene processing? So pag wala daw si SOCO team, sino ang pwedeng mag-process ng crime scene? Naturally, syempre, bawal si civilian. So hindi natin pagpipilian si civilian. At saka yung letter D. Okay, tanggal na po yung dalawa. So A or B po tayo. Maalala yung discussion natin, sino po ang pwedeng mag-conduct ng crime scene processing? First responder or investigator on case? Yan. Okay. Huwag nyo pong isagot si first responder. Sabi ko nga sa inyo, yung first responder natin, patrol officer po yan. Typically, mga patrolman ng mga yan. Yung training lang po ng mga yan sa FTP. Okay? Wala po silang basic investigatory training. So kapag walang SOCO, si IOC. Yan pong proper answer natin. Nga po IOC. Pero sabi nga natin, general rule, may body of the victim, tawagin mo si SOCO team. Okay. So, ito yung niya. Tapos na natin to kanina. Ito, na-discuss na rin natin kanina. Pero ganito yung kanyang statement. The following are requisites of dying declaration except. So, lahat ng mga sumusunod, requirement natin sa dying declaration, isa lang ang hindi. Saan po dyan? Yan, very good. Matalas ang paningin. Ang tamang sagot natin is alpha. Bakit? Ito, yung word na not. Okay, dapat wala yung not na yan. Sabi natin, yan ang number one rule natin, number one requirement natin before you obtain your sticulo mortis, your dying declaration. Next question. So, ano yung tanong? Ano yung ini-initiate ng team leader? Okay. Itong stage na to, i-establish na yung crime scene boundary. Okay. At saka magpaplano kung anong search ang appropriate. Yan. Lahat po ito, di ba? Na-discuss na natin yan. Lahat po yan, pasok po yan kasi iisa lang po ang ibig sabihin yan. Preliminary survey, initial survey, pero yung common na ginagamit na term, walkthrough. Walkthrough. Okay? Maglalakad lang yan. Eyes only, nothing is touch. Ang may trabaho niyan, si team leader. Okay. Pag ganito yung tanong, establish, ito yung keyword natin. So kapag visual, naturally, ito. Okay. Siyempre, that's photography. Ay, sorry. That's the correct answer. Photography. Pero ito pala, crime scene. Pati ako, hindi ko napansin eh. Ang proper answer natin, the best answer of course, yun. Hindi ko rin napansin eh. Of course, that's crime scene, photography. Because photography is a general term. Tama po ba? Meron tayong aerial photography, art photography, mga ganyan. So, syempre, ang proper para sa tanong na ito, kasi nga nandun yung word na crime scene, is crime scene photography. Okay, next. Okay, so sabi dyan, kapag photography, exact details. Ito naman, placement or location of objects. Tapos mag-show ng distances. Ito yung keyword natin eh, distance. So, we are talking to sketches or sketching. Tama po, bravo. Okay. This is a technical. Sabi natin comprehension na po ito. So sabi doon, kapag yung item na nakaspecify sa search warrant is nakuha na, kanino ito turn over ni police yung nakuha na items? Matinding tanong ito. Legal process po ito. Sa crime lab nga ba? IOC nga ba? Sa COP nga ba? Or sa judge? Balik tayo sa definition ng search warrant. Who issues a search warrant in the first place? Yan. So, we are talking here of search warrant in that we have an officer, okay, who was able to be directed. Remember, a search warrant is an order in writing. Tama po ba? An order in writing, personally signed by the judge. Di ba? Directing an officer to search and seize a property. So, therefore, it's the judge. So, we go back to the legal procedure. We stick to the legal procedure, actually. Sketches are not a substitute for photographs. Tama po ito. Okay? Hindi po siya substitute. Hindi po pwedeng pamalit ang sketch pag wala kang photo. Kasi, okay, they are only, ang proper term, they're only, hindi po yan duplicate, hindi po yan picture. Supplement po ang tawag natin dyan. Yan. Okay. Next. Okay, ito yung sinabi ko kanina na kay Montojo. So, tatlo po yung dinefine ni Montojo na types ng sketch. Okay, you have the sketch of locality, yung pinakamalawak. Okay? Like, pag merong crime scene for example, sa sa UST, okay? Sa particular na building, for example, criminology building, yung sketch of locality, yung malapit sa UST, okay? Kung nasa Sumakab siya, ano yung mga areas malapit doon? Ano yung mga roads na nandun? That's locality, okay? Yung sketch of grounds naman, okay? Nearest physical surrounding. So, ibig sabihin nun, pag nandito yung crime building, ano yung mga katabi niya ng building? Okay, meron ba siyang dyan? Meron ba siyang waiting shed? May footpath ba yan? May kalsada ba yan? Yan po yung sketch of grounds. Okay? Siyempre, yung sketch of details, kung sakali, sa second floor, sa ganitong room number 3, Yan na po yung sketch of details according to Montojo. Okay. Okay, so these are the 3 types of physical evidence na sinabi ko kanina. Na-encounter niyo po ba ito? Locating the suspect. Article that assist in locating the suspect. Oh, very good. Ang tawag po natin dyan, tracing evidence. Huwag po kayong magkakamali. Okay? Iba po ang ibig sabihin ng trace evidence sa tracing evidence. Ang tracing evidence, ito po yan. Assist. Articles that assist. Pero ang trace evidence, maalala nyo yung ginamit natin sa trace evidence? Transient evidence. Short-lived evidence. In short, these are biological evidence. Yan po ang pagkakaiba ng trace at saka ng tracing. Kasi ang types ng physical evidence, tatlo po yan. Corpus delicti evidence, associative evidence, at tracing evidence. So yung keyword natin dito sa tracing evidence is the word locating. Okay? Locating at saka yung assist. Okay. So ito yung isang type ng physical evidence natin. Nandyan yung keyword natin, essential. Essential element. Okay. This is a legal, no, it's a Latin maxim. Na yung English niya is, ano na yung English nito? This is corpus delicti evidence. Sometimes we commonly use the term the body of the what? The body of the crime. Not necessarily the body of the victim. So in arson, in cases of arson, the body of the crime is, of course, the burned property. The burned property. Kaya nga sa jurisprudence, merong tanong, gusto mong sunugin yung bahay ng kapitbahay mo. Tapos, nilagyan mo ng gasolina. Tapos, sinindihan mo. Pero, yung nasunog lang, yung kortina. Na-encounter nyo ba yun na Q&A? Lumabas po yun, actual po yun. Ang tanong, arson ba yun? Yan. So, the corpus delicti for the crime of arson, tama po, arson po yun. Because, mere intention of burning constitutes the crime of arson. Tama po, the intent is very important in establishing the crime of arson. Yan. So, we call it the body of the crime or the corpus delicti evidence. Pero murder, pag murder po, the body of the crime is basically the body of the victim. You cannot charge a case of murder without having presented the body of the victim. Okay, so another, ito na yung pangatlo, keyword na is yung which will link. Yan, tama po. This is now the time that we answer associative evidence. So you have there, corpus delicti, associative, tracing. Corpus delicti is the body of the crime. Associative evidence is link. Tracing evidence is locating. Yan. There you go. Yan. So naulit po ito. Naulit din po ito sa fundamentals natin. Criminal trademark or logo is our modus operandi. Okay. Yan po ang example niya. Okay. Yan. Ang dami nito. Okay. Best friend. Salisi. Ito yung common sa atin. Salisi gang. Dura boys. Pitas gang. Ito matindi kasi sa sasakyan mismo. Laglag barya. Okay. Next question. Ang keyword natin, actual measurement. Okay, so it's the sketch. Okay, itong tanong. Comprehension itong tanong na ito. So, sabi niya, the fact that no physical evidence was found at the crime scene will most likely mean that. Oh, matindi. Oh, ang bilis nilang napansin. So, sabi natin, there is no perfect crime scene. Yan. So, ibig sabihin nun, merong ebidensya. Okay? Yung pulis ang nasa pulis yung problema, nasa SOCO team ang problema, hindi sa crime scene. Kasi sa crime scene, meron at merong ebidensya. Ang kailangan mo lang, hanapin mo. Delta po ang sagot natin. Yan, baka kung sa actual review sabi niyo, yes sir, kasi yan yung pinakamahaba. The longest choice. Okay. Let's continue discussion already. Let's encounter this more of this Q&A. Marami pa kasi ito, pero kailangan kong i-cover bago tayo mag-end yung crime scene documentation. Okay? So, itong crime scene documentation na ito, last topic na po natin ito. Okay, okay yung mag-alala. Ito na yung sinabi natin kanina na notes taking, photography, sketching, okay, tsaka crime scene search. Okay, crime scene search. Para i-cover lang natin yung key topics na dapat nating ma-cover. Kasi sa Monday, ang focus na natin is yung special crimes na. Okay, yung examination of sexual assault investigation, yung mga ganyan ng topic natin. Examination of DNA, mga ganyan na. Kasi nga special crime. Ang topic natin ngayon is establish yung process ng ng crime scene processing. So, sa crime scene photography, mag-start muna tayo sa crime scene documentation. Ito 'yan, yung documentation. Ito 'yan. So, 4. Yan. So, ito. So, sa crime scene photography, di ba, meron tayong subject na photography, mas kino-cover pa 'yon. Ito lang kasi naka-focus siya sa crime scene talaga. So, ang gusto ko lang ituro sa crime scene photography is yung tatlong klase ng crime scene photographs. You have general, tama po ba? Mid-range. Yung general, the other term is overall. General or overall. Yung isa, mid-range or medium range. In other books, they call it evidence establishing photograph. At saka yung close range. General or overall, mid-range, close range. Yan. So, pag na to, punta tayo dun sa 3 types. Mas-short tayo ng time kung sakaling isa-isahin natin. Ito. So, ito lang yung importante. Anong gamit? Okay. And by the way, ano yung standard na mode ng pag-take ng photograph? At yung pinaka-importante tanong, ilang number ng photograph ang kailangan mong kunin sa bawat crime scene? Naka-encounter na po ba kayo ng ganung tanong? How many number of photographs should you take in a particular crime scene? Tanong sagot nyo doon. How many? Yan. So, basically, the general answer, okay, the general answer is tama, none or as many as possible. Okay, as many as possible. Yan. May nagsagot na 3 in every evidence. Oy, logical po yun. Before, during, after. Or general range, mid-range, close range. Yan. Pero sabi ko nga, the general answer there is as many as possible. Pero napansin nyo po ba sa picture na inintroduce ko kanina? 4-angle photograph. Okay? 4-angle photograph. Yan po yung standard. Tapos ginawang 8-angle. Kaya pag merong nakalagay na numbers, for example, sa crime scene, lumabas, ilang number of photos, tapos wala kang nakiting as many as possible. May nakita ka, 7, 8, 9, 10. Ang standard po is 8. Yun yung general photograph na 8. Bakit 8? Yung crime scene is square. Okay? Yung una, syempre, is the edges or the corners. 1, 2, 3, 4. Tapos lagay ka ng cross, sa gitna niya, 4 ulit, 8. Standard 8 photograph. Okay? Dati 4. Okay? 4 corners. Pero dinagdagan ng 4. Pero, as of my experience, wala pa namang ganung pinapalabas na tanong. Okay? Palagi ang tinatanong yung general na as many as possible. Take as many photos as possible when you are at a crime scene. So, i-discuss na natin kung ano yung purposes ng 3 types ng photograph. Yung general or overall is syempre to establish the overall view of the crime scene. Tama po ba? Siyempre, para makita mo yung overall na setup ng crime scene mo. Para kahit hindi nandun yung judge, hindi pumunta yung judge sa crime scene, meron siyang idea kung anong nangyari at kung anong meron sa crime scene. Now, ano naman ang purpose ng mid-range photograph? Sometimes, yung mid-range photograph kasi, medyo hindi masyadong malayo, hindi masyadong malapit. Sakto lang, umaga sakto lang. No, anong purpose kung bakit tayo nagmi-mid-range? Yan. Yung keyword na ginagamit sa reason kung bakit may mid-range photograph is to frame. Okay? To frame the location of evidence at the crime scene. Oh, ang galing. To locate determine the distance, isa rin po yan. Okay? Yung general term na ginagamit is to frame the evidence found at the crime scene. Magbibigay ako ng example. Yung baril nahanapan on top of a table. Sa mid-range photography, kukunin mo yung table na nakikita yung baril. Ibig sabihin nun, you will frame the gun, the firearm, that this particular firearm is located on top of the table. Yun po ang ibig sabihin ng framing the evidence at the crime scene. Typically, mid-range photography ang gamit niyan. Yan po ang purpose ng mid-range. So, for example, merong ashtray, merong bottle, nandun sa table. Pipicturean mo yung table na nakikita yung ashtray or bottle. Kasi, ang susunod na sa mid-range is yung close range or close-up photography. Siyempre, if the purpose of overall is to establish the view, remember, pag overall photography, eye level palagi yan. Eye level. Ibig sabihin, nung nakatayo yung photographer, eye level. So parang, pag ikaw yung nakikita ng picture, parang i-assume mo, nakatayo ka, nakikita mo yung picture. Parang nandun ka sa crime scene, nakatayo ka. Eye level po yun overall. Again, overall is establish. Okay, the overall picture. Mid-range is to frame the evidence in each of the location of the crime scene. Close range or close-up photography is to establish details. Yan, establish details. Tama po, to identify clearly the evidence. Ibig sabihin nun, yung baril. Anong klaseng baril yan? Beretta ba yan? 9mm ba yan? 45 ba yan? Revolver ba yan? Tapos doon pa sa baril, okay, makikita mo, okay, nakakasaba yan. May load ba yan? Baka naman merong fingerprint na semi-visible. Baka may dugo. Tapos na nakalagay din yung fingerprint. Yan na yung gamit ng close-up photography. Okay? So, that is the use of these three types of photographs. Yan po ang focus kung bakit natin i-present ito. Okay? Nakalagay po yan sa photographic log. So, ito yun. Ito yung sinasabi ko noon. This is the very old technique, okay, of photographing a crime scene. Now, yung turo sa amin noon is kapag nandito yung door, so for example, ito yung entrance, usually, clockwise. Yan, clockwise. So, pag nandito, syempre, ang typical na susunod, dito sa kanan. Yan. Hindi pwedeng, nandito yung number 1, yung number 2, on the other side. Dito banda. Nako, mahirap po yan. Hindi po niya sinusunod yung flow. May question po yan. Baka nandito biglang dumiretso doon. So, ibig sabihin nun, okay, sabi natin, wait lang.
Photo
Yan.
number 2. Photo number 3. Photo number 4.
Okay, so we call this the 4 angles or the 4 corners photograph. Tapos, nung nag-improve na sila, okay, nag-devise na sila ng 8 angles. Okay, each in the center. Yan. Okay. So, overall photograph sample, sketching, magkasama po yung sketch sa photography. So, kailangan yung sketcher in close coordination sa ating photographer. Yan. Okay, so yan na po. Mid-range. Anong ibig sabihin ng mid-range? By the way, yung normal lens, 50mm lens, yan yung mata natin. Okay? Yung ability ng mata natin is 50mm. That's normal view. Yung sketch, okay. May nagtatanong sa type ng sketch. I-cover natin yun mamaya. Although, ang sketch, marami pong klase yan. Okay, marami pong klase. Pero ang very basic type ng sketch, tama po yun, bird's eye view. Pero meron po siyang term na ginagamit. Okay? We're going to explore it. Okay, later on. Usually, ang ginagamit na hindi bird's eye view na type ng sketch. May proper term na ginagamit. Although, bird's eye talaga yung pagkakasketch. Okay? Rough sketch po yun sa rough sketch. So, ito yung keyword natin. Frame. Okay? To frame the item of evidence in a particular crime scene. Okay? So, may sample ata ito eh. Yan. So, ang purpose ng evidence establishing photograph or mid-range is not to show details. Ulitin natin pang close range yung show details. Simply to frame the item. That is your mid-range. So, bigay tayo ng example. Yan. Ito yung close-up. Evidence number 10. This is a dislodge bullet. Lead bullet. Tapos, okay, saan ito mahahanapan? Ito siya. This is a cardboard box. Okay? This is placard number 10 or evidence number 10. Nandyan po yung dislodge bullet. This is close range photograph showing the detail of the dislodge bullet. This is mid-range photograph showing the location of this dislodge bullet at the crime scene. Yan po ang ibig sabihin ng ito, mid-range or evidence establishing photograph. Close up. Okay, na-discuss na po natin yung close-up photograph. Yan. So, yung methodology, photograph the crime scene in situ. Ibig sabihin ng in situ, as is. Okay? Natural view. Kumbaga. Yan. Fragile evidence, transient evidence. Okay, I'm going to skip this. Physical control of the camera. Tinuro naman na siguro ito. Location, positioning, yan, i-clip natin, yung mga right-handed, left-handed clip natin. Pag naka-kneel tayo, okay, may support yung knee, mga ganyan. Photography po yan. Yan. So, this is an example, okay, of some of the photos. So, ito, syempre, it shows the details. Okay, it shows the details. Yan. Yan. Details po lahat yan. 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 Very clear po yung details ng mga yan. Okay. Ito. Ang tanong dito, nakita niyo po ba yung picture? Okay. Is this mid-range or is this overall? Is this mid-range or is this overall? So, tingin nyo. Ganyan yung nakita niyong photo. Mid-range po ba yan or overall? Remember, ang mid-range photography, very selective po ang mid-range photography. Kapag ang gusto mong i-depict is body of the victim on the bedroom. Pero pag overall, okay, unlike katulad nito, overall po ito, hindi po ito mid-range kasi kasama po yung ito, yung baseball bat. Kapag yung baseball bat pinicturean mo lang in this area, that is mid-range. Pero ito, it's actually depicting one side. Diba? Nandito yung end of the room. Other side, dito ka, pinicturean mo. So, this is shooting the four corners of the crime scene. Okay, hindi po yan mid-range. Overall po yan. Yan. Ito ang mid-range. Okay, pasintabi po. These are all pictures. Yan. So, syempre, overall na yan. Yan. Mga ganyan, overall photography po yan. Okay. So, tapos tayo sa photography. Notes taking tayo. Sa notes taking, huwag niyong kakalimutan, inductive po ang process, hindi deductive. So, pag sinabing inductive, specific to general po ang pag-document ng ating evidence. Yan. Yan po ang importante. Yan. Yan yung contents. Yan. Nakita nyo dito, weather. Yan. Importante yan. Okay. Victim, crime scene, yan. Lahat yan nasa documentation ng writing. Okay, nandito na po tayo sa sketching. Okay, konting tease pa. Patapos na po tayo. So, crime scene sketch, ito yung definition. Okay. General kinds, dalawa po. Excuse lang po saglit. Pag Mag-break po muna tayo 2 or 3 minutes. Ilang ako.
Nel.
Picture taking. Open your cam. Picture talaga. Wait lang ah. Asan na siya? Change layout. Mhm. Lahat ba naka-on na? Ayan. Maliliit na lang para kita lahat. Ang cute. Humiti naman kayo para kayong inaantok. Para kayong inaantok. Ayan.
Okay na ba?
Ayan.
Tuloy
Okay na,
natin.
sir.
Sige, tuloy natin. Nasa sketch na tayo. Pagkatapos ng sketch kasi, search technique. Okay na, tapos na. Okay? So, meron tayong dalawang main types ng sketch. Rough at saka finished or final. So, ang keyword natin sa rough sketch is measurements. Okay? Typically, rough sketches are done at the crime scene itself. Okay? So, pag crime scene sketch yan, napaka-simple lang po ng sketching. Yung importante lang po na details ang kailangang makita sa rough sketch. Katulad ng measurements or location of the items. Okay? So, yan ang keyword natin sa rough sketch. Saan ba yan? Nandito. It shows distance measurements. Yan ang pinaka-importante kasi sa rough sketch. So, here is a typical example of a rough sketch. Ito po yung lumabas noon sa board exam. Itong letter N. Okay? The compass orientation or the compass designation. Nandito po yung legend. Ayan, yung sunagot ng isang kasama. At makikita nyo, even the crime scene, yung area ng crime scene, measured po yan. Trabaho po yan ng mga measurers natin. Yung barrel, mga ganyan. Yung table, yung dresser, di ba? Locker, chair, mga ganyan. Tapos ito na yung yung parang details of the case. Rough sketch, ang tawag natin dito. Yung keyword ulit natin, meron kang makikitang distances, measurements. Okay. Yan, here's another example. More example. Basta may measurement, these are rough sketches. Lalo na ito, bahay, tapos ito, this is a sketch of grounds. Pag si Monto ang mag-categorize ito, sketch of grounds ito. Yan. Finish sketch on the other hand, ito yung keyword natin, meron siyang scale. Ibig sabihin ng scale is talagang tansyado mo, measured yan. Na, makikita nyo sa baba, drawn to scale. Ibig sabihin nun, in-scale siya. Yung 1 inch, example yung 1 inch equals 1 meter. So, ibig sabihin nun, 1 inch sa drawing, sa actual crime scene, 1 meter. Usually, AutoCAD ang gamit. Gamit na ito, mga expert na to sa sa computer. Kasi ito na yung sinasabi natin sa court for the appreciation of the court. Ngayon pa nga, meron pa silang tinatawag na 3D. 3-dimensional, meron pa ang 4-dimensional. Meron pa yung yung nakatutok yung barrel, tapos i-determine na yung look, yung parang trajectory ng bala, mga ganyan. These are all the new trends, okay? Kasama pa rin po ito sa finished sketch. Yan. So usually pang courtroom presentation po yan. So again, yung keyword natin is walang measurement, ang makikita mo lang scale. So ito, hindi po ito finished hindi po yan finished. Tama po ba? Yan. Rough po ito kasi may measurement. Ito na po siya. Okay, finished measurement. So, sabi ko kanina, meron siyang tinatawag na scale. So, itong measurement na ito, nung drawing mo, ganito kahaba is 1 foot. In the actual area. Yan. Pero syempre, nandun pa rin yung details. Okay? Basta may nakitang scale ganyan, walang measurement, finish na po yan. Okay? Final sketch po yan. Yan, rough versus final sketch. Yung sinasabi kong technology natin ngayon. Okay, nag-2-dimensional na tayo, 3-dimensional. Ito na yung technology natin ngayon. Yan, yung trajectory, mga ganyan. Yan po yung ability ng ating AutoCAD ngayon. Parts, walang kalimutan ito. Okay, compass designation. Siyempre, sa compass designation, hindi po nakalagay yung north, south, east, west, north, east, south, west. Wala po. North lang po, N lang po. Kayong arrow. So, two major types of sketch, rough at saka finish. Now, may nagtatanong kanina, yung bird's eye view. Okay, meron po tayong mga types ng sketches. So, yung bird's eye view, ang tawag po natin dyan is floor plan or overview. Okay? Yung ground sketch of grounds, kaya mo to, we call it neighborhood sketch. Yan. Ito pong number 3, ito po yung pinaka-common na ginagamit. Okay? Not only sa crime scene, but sa korte. Yung exploded view, okay? Baka hindi nyo po na-encounter to, pero yung ini-encounter nyo palagi is cross-projection sketch. Yan. Ano po ba yung cross-projection sketch? Yung definition niya is, you're going to draw the crime scene as if it is a cardboard box or in the walls are collapsed. Kung saan, makikita mo sa drawing mo or sa sketch yung nasa walls, windows, and doors. Kasi there are certain types of crime scene na may makikita kang ebidensya sa door, like sa doorknob, di ba? Sa window, or even sa roof. Blood spatter, okay? Hinak niya, yung dugo nandun sa wall. So, anong gagawin? Nandun sa ceiling. So, anong gagawin? I-sketch pati yung ceiling. Ang tawag po natin dyan, exploded view, or most common term, projection sketch, or yung the appropriate is cross-projection sketch. So, ito yung typical na floor plan or bird's eye view. Ayan, ito po yung normal. Pero to finish sketch na yan. Yan, mga ganyan po. Yan. This is an example of a neighborhood or ground. Ibig sabihin nun, near, directly, immediately near the surrounding area. Yan, that's neighborhood sketch. Ito na po yung cross projection. So, pag makikita nyo, na-improve ito na bird's eye view or floor plan na sketch. Ito yung bird's eye view. Ito lang yung limit niya, yung floor plan. Pero sa cross projection or exploded, nandito yung walls. Nandito yung walls. Tapos nakita na dyan yung window at saka yung doors. Ang gamit nga natin, sabi natin, ang gamit ng sketch nito kasi may additional evidence na pwedeng makuha sa walls. Even to the point na, sabi natin, even the ceiling. Ito pong number 12 evidence to blood spatter. So ito yung walls, ito yung floor, ito yung ceiling. Ang tawag natin dito, cross projection. Okay? Cross projection. Sa definition niya, the walls are collapsed. It is drawn like a cardboard box. Yan. So this is our exploded view. Yan. So here is an example of a typical scenario, vehicular accident, hit and run. Tapos gagamit ka ng tinatawag na measurements. Usually, typically, meron tayong tinatawag na common type of measurement is dalawa po yan. Rectangulation and triangulation. Pero ang pinaka-common po is yung triangulation. Now, deceiving po yung word na triangulation, di ba? Pag triangle, ilan ang sides ng triangle? Di ba? 3. But in triangulation, ang kailangan mo lang 2. Okay? Triangulation is a measurement technique wherein you're going to measure an evidence in 2 fixed points. Ang tanong, bakit 2? Bakit hindi 3? Ano bang mangyayari? Kasi, if you measure it in 2 fixed points, it will now create an imaginary triangle. That is why we call it triangulation. Okay, so do not be deceived. When you say triangulation, hindi po siya 3 measurements or 3 fixed areas. Kahit dalawa lang po yan. Sometimes, meron tayong ginagawang term na cross-triangulation. Yan. Yung cross-triangulation is you triangulate the evidence in 3 sides. So, magbibigay tayo ng example. Ito yung una. So, we have here letter B. This is an electric post. And sa standard natin sa measurement sa sasakyan, saan ka magme-measure daw? Saan yung fixed point mo? Saan yung point of reference? Typically, it is in the axle of the vehicle, sa gitna. Okay, sa gulong. Dito ko magme-measure. So, post to electric post, para maging triangulation ito, magme-measure ka from this axle of the car to this one, sa gilid. Anong tawag natin sa traffic? Yung gilid, sa shoulder ng kalsada. Okay, so ito again, to the post. Tapos, ito na siya. So, ito yung una, ito yung una. Now, pag i-connect mo yung tatlo, it creates now 3 sides. That's why, nag-originate yung word na triangulation. Yan. Kilometer post ito. So, from this car, the vehicle, yung wheels niya, doon sa shoulder ng road, i-measure mo sa kilometer post. Yan. Yan. Ito, kilometer post to the head to the shoulder. So, nakita nyo, nag-triangulate. Yung sa sasakyan, sa paanan ng paa, yung longest, yung malapit doon sa axle, tapos sa kabilang axle. Anong nangyari doon? Created a triangulation measurement. Sa ulo, first evidence, I think this is a dislodged shell. So, this is a shell triangulated to that of the axle of the car or the vehicle. Yan. Itong first shell, triangulate sa isa pang shell. Tapos, ita-triangulate doon sa axle. Yan. There you go. So, this is an illustration for you to appreciate what is meant by triangulation technique. Itong nangyaring ito, yung evidence 1 to evidence 2, cross-triangulation ang tawag dito. Okay. So, here you go. That is your compass designation. Siyempre, hindi kompleto yan pag wala yung arrow. Yan. Tapos, nandito na si nature of the case. Tapos, finally, hindi mawawala si legend. Okay, there you go. That is our measurement for sketching and measuring. Okay? So, meron tayong types of measurements. Sabi nga natin, yung pinaka-common is the triangulation technique. Ito. Measurement from 2 fixed points, creating that of a triangle. That's why we call it triangulation. Rectangulation, on the other hand, is simply measuring it from 2 straight lines. Okay? Iba yung 2 fixed points sa 2 straight lines. Kaya pag makikita nyo, it creates that of a square or a rectangle. Kaya tinawag na rectangulation. Okay. Compass point. Meron din tayong tinatawag na compass point kung saan iisang area, iisang fixed point, tapos i-measure mo na lahat. Yan, that is the compass point technique. Yan, like this one. This is the plaza. Dito nangyari yung crime. Nandiyan yung body of the victim. Iisang point, kahit lahat na evidence na makuha, dito manggagaling yung measurement. Yan. Pero pag tatanungin nyo, sir, anong common na ginagamit? It's triangulation. Okay? Triangulation technique of measurement. Yan. So, 2 fixed points to that of the firearm or the revolver, creating a triangle. Okay, triangulation. Last topic na po tayo, crimes in search. Yan. So, the purpose of crimes in search is the collection of evidence. So, depende po, meron po tayong kanya-kanyang technique. Okay, we have search patterns. The strip is otherwise known as line search. Saan po yung strip? Ganyan. Isa lang po yan. O tatlo kayo. Sabay-sabay. Okay. Ganyan. Okay. Pwede yan. O, diba? Ang dami nating visual. Strip or line search. Grid or double strip. Purpose is to double check. Pwedeng ganyan. Pagkatapos lahat dito, uulitin. Yan. Spiral. Sabi natin, the most common indoors. Meron tayong inward spiral and outward spiral. Depende sa purpose. Quadrant or grid search, you divide it into 4 quadrants and then further divide it into other quadrants. Yan. To limit and to maximize your crimes in searching. Yan. Bahala ka na kung anong search ang applicable in each area. Yan. We call it grid search. And then you have the pie or the wheel. Anong pagkakaiba ng strip, yung paikot, sa pie or wheel? Itong pie or wheel, hindi po sila iikot diretso. Yung pie or wheel, dalawa din po yan. Inward wheel or outward wheel. So yung inward, square yung crime scene, maipong kayo lahat in edges. Tapos, dediretso kayong paloob. So, yung vision nyo, dapat i-maximize nyo yung vision nyo para mag-overlap yung vision nyo habang pumapasok sa loob. Or, magkukumpulan kayo sa gitna, you're back on each other. So, nagtalikod kayo lahat, kaharap nyo yung outward. Tapos, maglalakad kayo, okay, maximizing yung vision. Unlike yung strip, iikot kayo, o nandun kayo sa gitna, tapos iikot kayo. Okay? Ito kasing pie or wheel, dediretso. Yan. So, pag makita nyo yung illustration, yan. Yan. So, ito, searcher na to, dapat yung vision niya ganyan, malawak, para mag-overlap yung vision ng bawat searcher. Okay? Yan. So, meron din tayong ibang types ng search like link, from evidence to evidence. Yan. So, sabi natin, yung placard, yung numbers, nakadepende po yan sa kung anong search technique ang ginamit. Kaya huwag kayong magtaka kung bakit pag pinicturean, bakit parang ang gulo. Ayan. Depende po yan sa search technique na ginamit. Collection of evidence. Our very last topic po ito. So, how do you collect evidence? May picture po ito para mapadali. So, sabi dito, what will determine the type and manner of collecting and preserving evidence? Yan. So, this is the nature of evidence. Okay? Wala pong standard. Depende po yan sa ebidensya na kukolektahin mo. Yan. So, this is an example. Diba? In other country po ito. Ito yung kit nila. Kompleto po sila. Yan. So, this is a sample for us to actually have a visual kung ano bang nangyayari sa marking of evidence. So, you have here the blood stain and you have here the markings. Okay? So, you have there exhibit B. Yan. So, nalagyan na ng exhibit yan, ha? Tapos, initial signature of the police investigator and the date and the SOCO case number. Yan. So, exhibit, signature, time and date of collection, and SOCO case number. So, another example is the blood stain. That's your evidence. Okay? And sabi dito, always place your markings away from the stain. Siyempre, bakit may distance? Siyempre, to avoid contamination kasi yung ink niyan ng pentel pen, baka makontaminate yung dugo. So, dapat may appropriate distance. Ito, nasunod talaga kasi ito yung yung divide ng shirt, di ba? Sa baba talaga niya sinulat. Still, containing the details like this one. Exhibit A, initial, okay, date and time. The details are still there. Yan. So sabi, ang technique na to, encircling. Yan. So say for example, merong blood stain or merong semen. Yung semen, pag wet yan, makikita mo. Pero pag dry, pwedeng mag-disappear yan. So ang ginagawa, may encircling technique. Yan. Ini-encircle nila yan. Yan. So sa encircling, still there is distance. Ito yung blood stain, yung markings, medyo hindi siya masyadong malapit doon. Okay? Yan. So, ito, makita naman yung seminal fluid. Naging dry na yan. Okay? So, kailangan i-encircle natin. Okay. And then, sabi natin, if you cannot put the label on the item, you can tag it. Still, the contents are there. Yan. So, tagging is applied. Yan. But still, the details are there. Okay? So, how do you collect? For biological, always paper bag. Yan po yung universal na standard natin. Yan. Small envelopes, pag trace evidence, meron tayong tinatawag na appropriate containers. Druggies fold, ito yung sinasabi ko sa inyo. Fingerprints, index card, arson debris, meron tayong tinatawag na glass jar. Yan. Castings, lahat po yan. Okay. Guidelines niya. Okay. Yan. These are tagging techniques. Even containing the same details of the evidence. And then, okay, one of the most important in collection of evidence is the seal. Sometimes they call it integrity seal. Paano ba yan? Ito. Yan. Tapos i-countersign mo. Para pag binuksan yan, okay, masisira yung arrangement ng signature. Yan. Integrity seal plus counter signature. Yan ang tawag natin dyan. Okay? To assure na hindi nabuksan o hindi nagalaw yung evidence. Ito yung content ng nasa evidence, ng details, description of the item, date and time of recovery, location, recovered, suspect victim, and then, yung pinaka-importante na kinilame natin, chain of custody of evidence. Importante po yan. Okay? So, ito yung ideal. Pag naubusan tayo, ito na yung improvise. Pero pag titingnan nyo, the same details pa rin. You have there the integrity seal. Okay, may X siya. Yan. Hindi pa rin nawawala. Kahit scotch tape yan, may counter signature. Yan. Exhibit number, the date and time, the description. Yan. So, hindi pa rin nawawala yung basic na contents. Yan. Ito yung ideal naman sa pointed evidence or pointed objects. Pag naubusan tayo niyan, nag-creative tayo okay? Madiskarte kumbaga. But still, the contents are present. Okay? May integrity seal pa rin siya, may signature siya, and details. And other information. Yan. Pag paper envelope, yung typical mga evidence na, ganyan pa rin. Seal with counter signature. Yan. To ensure. Okay? Pero ito, may mga sealable na okay? Airproof, mga ganyan. Lalo na pag ganyang evidence. But the contents still are the same of the evidence para talagang admissible sa court. So, ito yung example ng tagging. Labeling through tagging. Ibaril yan eh. Okay? So, itatag nila. Makita nyo sa trigger guard talaga yung niya, hindi sa barrel. Okay. So, I'm going to end to this particular part. Probably we are now going to entertain if there are questions that you want to raise. Kasi sa next na meeting natin sa special crime, very specific crimes na talaga ang di-discuss natin. So, Ma'am Christina, I would like to turn over. Tapos na po. Ma'am.